What happened in the Void Century? What are the ancient weapons? Who is Joy Boy? What is the One Piece? I'm certainly not the first person to try answering these questions. In the field of physical sciences, Albert Einstein is most famous for developing the theories of special and general relativity, but his later years were spent on researching what he referred to as the unified field theory. So what does that mean? Well, a particular set of mathematical formulas describe the behavior of electromagnetism, while a wholly separate set describe the gravitational forces. Einstein endeavored to unify these two forces through a single set of equations. Ultimately, Einstein's quest was deemed not incorrect, but incomplete. As Stephen Hawking said in A Brief History of Time, the time was not ripe for Einstein's theory because the groundwork in other disciplines was not yet complete, particularly in the field of quantum mechanics. Nevertheless, other scientists have since taken up his pursuit of this theory of everything. Michio Kaku, co-founder of string theory, has described this as an attempt to read the mind of God, by developing a simple and elegant set of formulas to relate the various physical principles which govern the universe. We're not doing anything nearly so serious because this is a comic book about a rubber pirate, and I'm certainly not comparing myself to Albert Einstein. But the principle is similar, a one-piece theory of everything, which attempts to answer most of the biggest and most important questions in the One Piece world. We're not quite reading the mind of God, but I guess you could say we're attempting to read the mind of Oda. What if I told you there was a single, yet to be identified character from the distant past who holds global significance, and that uncovering this figure is the key to answering all of the biggest questions in One Piece? And surprisingly, I'm not talking about Joy Boy, Sun God Nika, Shirahoshi, Blackbeard, Luffy, Buggy, Shanks, Roger, or any of the other usual suspects. In fact, this incredibly important figure hasn't yet been given a name, but its influence can nevertheless be seen throughout the entire One Piece world, and much like the mythic warrior of liberation, Sun God Nika, has been hiding in plain sight for a very, very long time, but this legendary figure may tie everything together. If so, any attempts to unravel the mysteries of the One Piece world may be incomplete without first identifying this key variable. So who or what was this legendary figure? I believe the dragon embodied by Momo and Kaido's Devil Fruit may be a mythic figure from the distant past, whose influence completely reshaped the One Piece world. We see evidence that this dragon was revered all over the world, extending back through the mists of time, which is all the more significant when we consider the Japanese folklore and fairy tales which seemingly served as Oda's inspiration. But ultimately, the answer to what happens next and the role the mythological dragon is going to play lies in the distant past, which is to say, we have to go back! All the way back to the very beginning.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then you see, our whole universe was in a hot death state and nearly 14 million years ago expansion started.
Wait, that's way too far. Let's fast forward just a little bit. The age of the One Piece world and its accompanying cosmos is a question even I won't attempt to answer, but based on the crew's reaction to dinosaurs on Little Garden, I think we're probably looking at a similar timescale to our own universe.
Roll back right to the dawn of time when Earth was smoking and the lava flowed.
So let's skip ahead a few billion years and begin by examining an already formed and inhabited sapphire world. But when exactly does our story begin? Before identifying this mythic dragon, I think it's important to first clarify one very important detail regarding the timeline of the One Piece world by asking one simple question. When did the Lunarians rule the Earth? Resolving this seemingly small detail may actually reveal quite a bit about the history of the One Piece world itself and the overarching conflict which will ultimately reach its climax when Luffy and the Straw Hats at last rediscover One Piece and turn the world upside down in the process. I believe we already possess several clues which allow us to pinpoint when the downfall of the Lunarians occurred and that their destruction may be one of the most important and monumental events in One Piece world history, which marks the start of the current epoch, Year Zero on the One Piece calendar. We currently know the Lunarians are an incredibly powerful group of beings capable of spontaneous combustion, resisting physical damage, and surviving inhospitable environments, who were once regarded as gods. They lived atop the Red Wall long ago, before the Celestial Dragons came to occupy the Holy Land Mari Joie, but were somehow eradicated, leaving King as one of the few surviving members of his race, if not the last. The most interesting detail here, at least from my perspective, is the fact that this so-called land of gods atop the Red Wall predates Mari Joie. There is a fairly common theory that the Red Line was constructed during the Void Century, which concluded with the ascension of the 20 kings and their families. The primary basis for this theory is Orr's epithet, continent puller, which suggests he and his people may have once had a hand in moving landmasses. The red line appears to be aberrant in the world of One Piece, and its association with the world government, formed 800 years ago by the 20 Kings, makes the red line seem like a likely candidate for a continent once pulled by so-called continent pullers. To further evidence this theory, Pangaea Castle, which resides in the Holy City, derives its name from the real-world supercontinent, which broke apart approximately 175 million years ago. The same symbol can be seen inside Imu's vault and on Orr's clothing, providing evidence the two are somehow linked. The red line does indeed appear to be an aberration in the world of One Piece, which lends weight to the idea that it was artificially constructed. It's an amalgam of numerous distinct microclimates, suggesting it could have been pieced together. Importantly, it seems the wildlife in the world of One Piece are not evolved to coexist with the Red Wall. When the Straw Hat Pirates first entered the Grand Line, they encountered Laboon, an island whale separated from his family by the impenetrable Red Line. Laboon's nose is draped in scars from continually ramming against the globe-spanning supercontinent. This behavior was seemingly explained by the promise made to Laboon by Brook's crew, the Rumba Pirates. But much later, when the Straw Hats first arrived in the New World, they were accompanied by a gam of island whales, all of which featured the same scars as Laboon, indicating this behavior is common to Laboon's species, as if it were instinctive that the Red Line should not be in the way of their natural migration patterns. We can further look at the geographic positioning of the Red Line, which runs orthogonally to the Grand Line, the Sea of Dreams, which protects One Piece and the true history, suggesting they serve opposite purposes. Certainly, a massive 10-kilometer tall wall of Earth separating the world seas and restricting travel serves the interests of a world government intent on oppressing people's freedom and upholding the authoritarian rulership of corrupt nobles. In fact, the first time the Red Line and Grand Line were explained by Nami in Chapter 23, the Red Line was depicted as a wall separating the world's two oceans, and just recently, Marco referred to the Red Line as the Red Wall. The connotation of the visuals and terminology associated with this landmass are clear and indicate its ultimate intended purpose. Building further on this theory, the land of Wano is unique in that much like the Red Line, it features numerous distinct microclimate zones. Thus, the skull of Onigashima, matching the shape of the so-called continent pullers on a much larger scale, lends even more weight to the idea that the ancient giants were involved in constructing certain geographic features of the One Piece world, including potentially the Red Line and Wano. However, we can now say with certainty that the Red Line predates the reign of the Celestial Dragons, which seemingly dispels any notion that the 20 Kings were responsible for the construction of the Red Wall. The Lunarians are said to have been the prior inhabitants of this massive supercontinent, which encircles the One Piece world. But now we must ask, when did this transfer of ownership take place? When did the Lunarians fall from their lofty land of gods? We know it was before the formation of the world government, but was it during the Void Century or sometime even earlier? I actually believe the answer to at least that last question has already been revealed. Importantly, Queen told Sanji the downfall of the Lunarians is recorded in history, and Big Mom seems to be fully aware of the race to which King belongs. Legends of the Lunarians living atop the Red Line also persists, as we know from Marco's memories of Whitebeard. This means the history of the Lunarians may not be common knowledge, but records of their powers and their demise remain accessible, unlike the tale of the Forgotten Kingdom recorded solely on the poneglyphs. Thus, we can confidently say the Lunarians were not the ones wiped out by the 20 Kings during their rise to power. Oda has rarely provided the specific calendar date for events in One Piece, which makes the few instances where he has done so particularly noteworthy. Most events in the One Piece world are only given relative dates. Oda tells us through text box how many years before the ongoing narrative a flashback scene takes place, which allows us to construct a rough timeline of events. The first time an actual calendar year is mentioned is in chapter 203. During the Alabasta story arc, Robin descended with Crocodile into the royal crypts in search of the poneglyph said to reveal the location of the ancient weapon Pluton. Though she indeed found a poneglyph, she told Crocodile it recorded only the history of the nation of sand. We later learned in chapter 218 that Robin was lying to Crocodile, as Cobra confirmed the poneglyph revealed everything Crocodile wanted to know about Pluton, including its location. Importantly, as part of her deception, Robin read Crocodile a sample of Alabasta's history and indicated the calendar date for particular events which took place in the Age of Heaven, or Tenreki. The next time a specific calendar date was mentioned, and the only time a definitive year was stated for events actually depicted on panel, came from the log of Noland's voyage to the kingdom of Shandora. Noland's flashback was set 400 years before the current events in One Piece, and Noland dated his arrival on Jaya in the year 1122 in the Age of the Sea Circle, or Kaien Reki. His voyage began in the year 1120 and ended in 1127. Also worthy of note, the day and month divisions in the Sea Circle calendar seem to match our real-world Gregorian calendar. From this information, we can extrapolate several important details. First, through the dates listed by Robin, as well as those recorded by Noland, we know that two distinct calendar systems are used in the One Piece world, much like our own. The current epoch is referred to as the Age of the Sea Circle, or Kaien Reki, which began roughly 1500 years before the present point in time. From this, we can date certain key events, including the construction of Shandora in the year 400, Zunisha's curse in the year 500, the start of the Void Century in the year 600, the end of the Void Century, and the ascension of the Celestial Dragons in the year 700, Noland's voyage between the years 1120 and 1127, and the current Great Era of Piracy, which takes place in the 1500s Kaien Reki. Also worth noting, Roger indicated Joy Boy left behind One Piece on Laugh Tale 800 years ago, which coincides with the end of the Void Century in the year 700 in the Age of the Sea Circle. We can thus assume the Age of Heaven or Tenreki precedes the current epoch, and likely ended about 1500 years before the present story of One Piece. We don't actually know if the Age of Heaven directly precedes the Age of the Sea Circle, but given there are only two calendar systems referenced thus far, I think it's a safe assumption. Very little has been revealed about the previous era, but we do know Alabasta was already a thriving kingdom during the Age of Heaven, as the palace in Alubarna was said to have been constructed 4,000 years before the present. This means Luffy's voyage is taking place around the year 1520 Age of the Sea Circle, or Kaien Reki. The Void Century began around 900 years ago and ended 800 years ago, which means the current One Piece world calendar began about 600 years before the Void Century. Yet we know recorded history in the One Piece world dates back at least as far as 5,000 years, when the Tree of Knowledge on Ohara was said to have been planted. Interestingly, I believe the fall of the Lunarians may fit a theory I have held for a long time, that some monumental event must have occurred to mark the transition from the previous calendar system to the one currently in use. The world nobles have positioned themselves as false gods, and centered the world around the formation of the world government. They even erased 100 years of history to mask the means by which the 20 kings rose to power, and as Clover asserted, to hide the existence of the Forgotten Kingdom, which once possessed the ancient weapons. Beyond the fact that the Celestial Dragon's own sense of self-importance would be compelling enough reason to restart the calendar year to mark their ascension to so-called godhood, the best way to erase the Void Century would have been to restart the calendars and declare the end of the 100-year void to be the new year zero, so as to communicate nothing before this matters, and to further discourage inquiry into events they want to be forgotten. Leaving the calendars as is and voiding a century in the middle of the timeline is far more conspicuous, and as far as we know, they have no discernible motive to not restart the calendars with the formation of the world government marking year zero, unless they know the world wouldn't recognize that change, because something undeniably more important happened in year zero. This further suggests the Celestial Dragons also recognize this theoretical event as somehow more important than themselves and the formation of the world government. They maintain the calendar system because they too regard the reason for the epochal shift marked by the transition from the Age of Heaven to the Age of the Sea Circle to be important and worth not only remembering but memorializing. The calendar system currently used is Kaien Reki, or in the Viz translation, the Age of Kaien. This roughly translates to the Age of the Sea Circle, which immediately brings to mind the Grand Line, the sea which encircles the globe and leads to One Piece. This perhaps suggests the Grand Line came into being 1500 years before the story began. The prior epoch is referred to as Tenreki, or the Age of Heaven, which certainly matches the described time period in which a land of gods once occupied the top of the Red Wall. The end of the Age of Heaven would thus fittingly describe the fall of these so-called gods. I think we can thus begin to form a picture of the major events which mark the epochal shift from the Age of Heaven to the Age of the Sea Circle. The fall of the Lunarians and the destruction of the land of gods at the end of the Age of Heaven, and the formation of the Grand Line, the birth of the Sea Circle, which provided the name for the world's current epoch. Above all else, I believe what the change in calendar system indicates is that though the world government is the dominant political body, the ocean itself is presently viewed as the true ruler of the One Piece world, and thus Imu's task in subjugating people's freedom remains incomplete. One last point worth remembering in understanding these two systems of dating is Oda's frame of reference. In the real world, the dating system spread throughout Europe by Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, and later exported to other parts of the world during the colonial era, splits recorded history into two distinct epochs, with the birth of Christ marking year 0. Importantly, though the year numbering system based on BC and AD is used ubiquitously throughout the world due to global communication and commerce, countries which historically weren't directly influenced by Rome may also use their own dating systems. Japan uses the Gregorian calendar, with year designations noting the year of the reign of the current emperor. Thus, the dating conventions of Tenreki and Kaienreki may be more directly based on the imperial dating system used in Japan. All of this is to say you could also think of these two calendar systems as indicating the reign of heaven and the reign of the sea circle. Thus, while I believe a pivotal event occurred to mark this epochal transition for the reasons previously noted, I think the people within the One Piece world recognize what is viewed as the dominant or ruling force with the calendar system used, just as those living in Japan date the calendar year based on the year in the reign of a particular emperor. Therefore, the term Tenreki indicates the reign of heaven, which fittingly describes the time period in which the Lunarians inhabited their so-called land of gods atop the Red Wall. The term Kaienreki, or the Age of the Sea Circle, not only tells us when the Grand Line was created, it also indicates that the Sea Circle is presently viewed as the dominant or ruling force within the One Piece world, even by the world government. Quite fitting for a seafaring adventure story. Now importantly, if the red line represents oppression and division, and the sea itself represents freedom, then the Grand Line, created by the power of the sea, is the ultimate expression of freedom in the One Piece world. What's becoming clear is that while the true history holds the key to understanding exactly what happened during the Void Century, which took place between the years 600 to 700 in the Age of the Sea Circle, the conflict in the One Piece world likely began much earlier. Zunisha was cursed 1,000 years ago. Ryugu Kingdom was already forcibly located at the bottom of the sea during the Void Century, and the fact that Nika was famous for liberating slaves means the world wasn't in some type of idyllic utopian state before the rise of the 20 Kings and world government. By identifying this epochal shift, it becomes clear that our story actually begins during the prior Age of Heaven, more than 1500 years before Luffy set sail, during which the epic struggle between the forces of freedom and oppression truly began. In truth, we know very little about the Age of Heaven, but we can determine this era ended roughly 1500 years ago. Luffy's awakened ability channels the power of mythic warrior of liberation, sun god Nika. As I said, I'm unsure if this supposed solar deity ever really lived. If so, it was probably during this Age of Heaven, long before the formation of the Grand Line, or the Sea Circle. We already know Oda's been hinting at Nika ever since Skypiea, not only through the campfire scene, but also through the ritual sacrifice performed by the people of Shandora, offering tribute to the sun god. During this ceremony, they also reference gods of the earth, forest, and rain, which perhaps suggests these mythical beings reigned or directly interfaced with the material world in the distant past. Certainly, there seems to be similarity between the Shandorans' beliefs regarding sacred ancestor trees protecting souls, and the belief on Wano that souls of the fallen warriors continue to resonate in their blades. This could indicate some shared origin point in the distant past. We have some indication that the world of the distant past was technologically advanced. Physicist Willie Caron, the energy steroids held as a sacred treasure on Fishman Island, perhaps successful gigantification experiments using the lineage factors of ogres to modify giants, breeding Ur's gargantuan people, and the army of automatons on the moon, seemingly connected to the Sky People, all evidence the fact that though Vegapunk is on the cutting edge of modern science, ancient technology lost to time may have been equally, if not even more advanced. As I pointed out, the downfall of the Lunarians could mark the end of the Age of Heaven, but we haven't quite resolved the role they played during this prior epoch. As I've detailed in past videos, the moon is one of the most important and recurrent symbols throughout the entire series, so a lunar race living atop the Red Line in an era which precedes the creation of the Grand Line is interesting to say the least, and their reign and fall likely tie into the overarching conflict in a significant way. But at this point, we're still left with so many unanswered questions. First and foremost, what actually are the Lunarians, and what is their connection to the moon? Though the Lunarians have distinct anatomical and physiological features not found among the other sky races, they are still likely somehow ancestrally related, and we know the other sky people also have some deeper connection to the moon. For example, we know King and his people are capable of surviving all sorts of inhospitable environments, which could explain Eneru's ability to go walking on the moon without a spacesuit if the Birkins share ancestry with the Lunarians. So what role, if any, did the Lunarians have in creating the ancient city on the moon's surface? The Lunarians were once considered gods, so could Eneru's delusional belief in his own divinity and his deep reverence for the moon, referred to as the Endless Farce, be rooted in the history of the Lunarians? The next question, if not the 20 kings, then who was responsible for the downfall of the Lunarians? This is a question Sanji pondered in chapter 1033, and Queen indicated the answer is recorded in the pages of history. If King accurately represents the strength of the Lunarians, then certainly an entire civilization of such beings could be a threat to those who want to hold power, like Imu. And I suspect the dark forces in the One Piece world were working behind the scenes long before they finally emerged and rose to power during the Void Century. As noted, their association with the Red Wall perhaps indicates they were oppressors like the modern Celestial Dragons, as the wall which separates the world Season 2 seems to be a physical representation of the world's division and oppression. After all, it's no small coincidence the reigning foe deities, the Celestial Dragons, have also chosen the Holy Land Marijois to call their home. So could the Lunarians have been villains from the distant past who had a hand in the construction of this massive supercontinent, over which they ruled as gods much like the modern Celestial Dragons? I could imagine this being the case, though I am hesitant because moon symbolism has been consistently used to represent those allied or at least morally aligned with Joy Boy. The moon in One Piece has been consistently used as a symbol of hope and a promise of the approaching new dawn. Regardless, this leads me to believe that the downfall of the Lunarians may have been an important step in a master plan to seize power which dates back millennia. For whatever reason, their demise didn't need to be masked like the destruction of the Forgotten Kingdom. Conversely, if this theory is correct, the decline of the Land of Gods was forever marked in the pages of history by an epochal shift ending the Age of Heaven. Perhaps the reason their downfall wasn't erased is because they had surrendered their role as divine protectors of the Devil Fruit and World Nexus, or Axis Mundi, where the Eve Tree grows, in order to seize power for themselves. Resultantly, their demise is celebrated the world over. If so, we have some indication that after their fall from grace, the Lunarians had some form of redemption or change of heart, as King was the one who told Kaido about Joy Boy. Robin and Odin both first learned the name Joy Boy from the Apology poneglyph in the Sea Forest on Fishman Island. Odin then shared this information with the Roger Pirates and King Neptune. Yamato also learned about Joy Boy through Odin's writing. Kaido first mentioned Joy Boy in chapter 1013, and at the time we didn't know how he learned about this name. Him being aware of Joy Boy without having read the poneglyphs or without having known any poneglyph readers was significant, but now it would seem that information came from Albert. Thus far, he's the only one to mention the name Joy Boy who hasn't read the poneglyphs directly or learned about the name from someone who has. From this, we can extrapolate that the Lunarians must have some knowledge of Joy Boy that is not common to the rest of the world, meaning the remnants of the Lunarians in the modern era could be awaiting Joy Boy's return. Perhaps they had this change of heart after realizing they'd been deceived by Lord Imu, just like the 20 kings. Albert may have backed the wrong horse by endorsing Kaido's bid to become Pirate King, but this would suggest that the Lunarians, much like the Fishmen, Minks, Kozuki, and possibly Giants of Elbaf, will be vital allies in the future war to liberate the One Piece world. But according to the Viver cards, King is only 47 years old, which means at the very least his parents were still alive in the not so distant past. Does this then mean an enclave of Lunarians remains somewhere in the world? The fact that King may not be the last of his kind seemingly lends more weight to the idea that Sanji is somehow related to the Lunarians, either through his ancestry or through Judge's Germa experimentation. Sanji's mother was named Sora, which means sky in Japanese, and his father Vinsmoke Judge goes by the epithet Garuda, which is a bird-like creature in Hindu cosmology. The Germa crest even utilizes an eagle-like symbol. Thus, on multiple levels, it seems there is some thematic connection between Sanji and the Sky People. Queen indicated Sanji's flames are unnatural and reminiscent of King's, and the durable endoskeleton featured by Sanji and his siblings seems to be similar in nature to the Lunarians' imperviousness to damage. I presented evidence which suggests the Red Line was constructed during the Age of Heaven, potentially through the combined efforts of the Lunarians and Or's much larger ancestors based on shared ideology and iconography. Even if this turns out to be the case, we're likely still missing a key piece of information, because constructing a globe-spanning, 10-kilometer tall wall of solid rock would be unimaginably time and energy intensive, no matter how large Or's ancestors might have been, and thus likely involved some supernatural process or force. Yet I believe, much like the modern Celestial Dragons, these primordial oppressors serve the interests of the true devil who now occupies the empty throne. It may be notable that the red line rises 10 kilometers above the ocean's surface. Given the delusional sense of divinity possessed by its inhabitants past and present, perhaps this represents an attempt to reach the heavens, so to speak, alluding to the mythic Tower of Babel, an effort by mortal beings to achieve divinity. As Bruce Springsteen sings in the song Badlands, poor men want to be rich men want to be kings, and kings aren't satisfied until they rule everything. If Emu is an enemy of freedom, and thus the sea itself, perhaps the reason he resides atop the Red Wall is to remain far removed from its influence. Devil fruit users are cursed by the sea, and perhaps so too is Emu. It would make sense to remain as far as possible from his greatest weakness. This could even explain Tequila Wolf's construction. If Emu can't set sail, then perhaps this massive bridge is meant to bring him to some unknown destination across the sea. The story of One Piece is ultimately about the pursuit of freedom. As Luffy stated on Sabaody in chapter 507, he wants to become the Pirate King in order to maximize personal freedom. We can thus intuit that the antagonistic force in the story, this primordial evil, which initiated the overarching conflict and serves as Luffy's thematic antithesis, represents an inversion of this ideal, oppressing and restriction of freedom. I believe we see this thematic struggle between freedom and oppression represented in the world's geography. After all, the Red Line isn't the only globe-spanning geographic superstructure. The Red Line and Grand Line are positioned orthogonally and serve counter purposes. The sea in One Piece represents the ability to pursue freedom. Before the Red Line was constructed, people from all over the world would have been able to freely sail the world's seas. The ocean is the connective tissue which binds together the world's people and the geographically distinct islands they inhabit. Conversely, the Red Line restricts travel to certain defined and controlled routes, and those which aren't directly under the government's control are extraordinarily dangerous. I believe the evidence suggests the Red Line came into being before the Grand Line, which then means the latter was created in response to the former. The Red Line was created first, likely during this Age of Heaven. This is important as it tells us that though the world government later rose to power during the Void Century, there has been an evil oppressive force in the One Piece world for more than 1500 years. So to summarize, at some indefinite point in the past, dark forces converged to construct the Red Line. Then, 1500 years ago, the Grand Line came into being as a counterbalancing force for good.
There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil.
But how does the fall of the Lunarians relate to the start of the current epoch, the Age of the Sea Circle? The Grand Line, which I assume to be the Sea Circle for which the current calendar system is named, is the Sea of Dreams, hemmed in by the Calm Belts, which are home to the Sea Kings, ancient sentient beings who also await the promised future day when One Piece is rediscovered. I asserted that the Grand Line, much like the Red Line, was intentionally created to serve a purpose. But why, how, and by whom? You may be familiar with the design principle, form follows function, and indeed, the particular form of the Grand Line is remarkable. The Grand Line seems to be a gauntlet intentionally designed to test adventurers' strength and their ability to form bonds of fellowship with many people across the sea in pursuit of the final island. The purpose of this filtering system seems to be intrinsically linked with the treasure hidden on Laugh-Tale. In Chapter 966, Roger confirmed the legend of the treasure at the end of the Grand Line which spurred his voyage already existed from long ago. Thus, the legend of the treasure and the government's desire to prevent it from being discovered predate Roger's successful circumnavigation of the globe, his coronation as Pirate King, the name One Piece, Roger's execution, and the current great era of piracy. In Chapter 967, Roger confirmed Joy Boy was the last person to have visited Laugh-Tale 800 years earlier, which suggests One Piece was left behind at the very end of the Void Century. As indicated by the various prophecies of Joy Boy's return and the approaching New Dawn, rediscovery of this ancient treasure will mark another epochal shift in the One Piece world. But importantly, the nomenclature of the world's calendar system indicates the Grand Line's formation, and thus its purpose, if its construction was indeed intentional, is rooted in an event even earlier than the Void Century. Essentially, we know the Red Line existed prior to the Void Century based on the fact that the Lunarians preceded Mari Joie, and the name of the prior epoch suggests it has existed for more than 1500 years. The Lunarians and the Land of Gods likely inhabited the Red Wall during the Age of Heaven. Although the 20 Kings had no hand in its formation, there is still strong indication the Red Line is artificial because it acts as a wall separating the world's seas, restricting freedom. I believe the fact that the Grand Line is bordered and protected by the Sea Kings suggests the world's most famous ocean route was similarly intentionally constructed, and its purpose is to protect the treasure contained on the final island, guiding the world toward freedom. The nomenclature of the current epoch, Kaien Reki, or the Age of the Sea Circle, suggests the Grand Line was originally formed at the start of this current era, and is responsible for its name. One Piece is widely believed to be the key to upending the world government, but the current regime came into power 600 years after the Grand Line's formation, suggesting this ocean route already had a purpose in protecting the final island before the Void Century. The Grand Line can only be entered through specific defined routes, meaning it must be traveled unidirectionally. Anyone who seeks the end of the line is thus forced to sail across the entire world. This requires a tremendous amount of skill and incredible physical strength to survive such a harrowing voyage. Yet strength alone isn't enough, as the 4 road poneglyphs are needed to reach the true final island Laugh-Tale. Only by becoming friends with those who guard these red monoliths and the ones capable of translating them can the voyage to the end of the Grand Line be completed. Thus, this filtering system tests the mettle of those who attempt this perilous voyage. The journey itself naturally selects for the qualities requisite of the future Pirate King. Only by possessing physical fortitude, strength of will, and upstanding moral character can Laugh-Tale be reached and One Piece be discovered. The form of the Grand Line, as well as its orientation relative to the Red Line, indicate it was designed for a purpose, and we can recognize that purpose during the current great era of piracy and protecting One Piece and the true history until the right person arrives at the right time, as people from all over the world set sail in pursuit of Roger's treasure. Yet the Grand Line was formed 600 years before the Void Century, long before Roger and even Joy Boy. Thus, based on its design, it was meant to serve the same purpose before Joy Boy's era. After all, if the reign and fall of the Lunarians took place during the Age of Heaven, the overarching conflict in the One Piece world must have begun much earlier than the Void Century War between the 20 Kings and the Forgotten Kingdom. This would then mean the Grand Line was meant to guide the world toward freedom long before Joy Boy's era began. The early age of the Sea Circle is fascinating in that we do know some key events which took place during this era. The kingdom of Shandora was said to be a thriving nation in the year 402 Kaienreki, and the land of Zo was formed atop Zunisha's back around the year 500 Kaienreki, or 100 years before the start of the Void Century, 200 years before it committed a great crime. These nations, which would later ally with Joy Boy, were prosperous before the cataclysmic war that soon followed, which indicates that despite the continued presence of the Red Line, the world was enjoying a relative degree of peace. Perhaps most importantly, Wano's borders were open, and thus, by extension, so too was the Grand Line. In the 800 years following the end of the Void Century, Wano's borders have been closed to the world, restricting access to its primary natural resource, sea stone. In the modern age, the Grand Line can only be entered through Reverse Mountain because its borders are guarded by the Conbelts and the Sea Kings. But Sea Stone allows the Conbelts to be traversed at any point. This means that in the 600 years preceding the Void Century, Wano's open borders made the Grand Line far more accessible and welcoming to those who pursued freedom. We see here the importance of the Grand Line, which permits entry to anyone seen as an ally of the sea and keeps out enemies of freedom. And it would seem Wano's natural resource is the key. This is the reason the Grand Line remains the world's dominant force, because the ocean is vast and its power cannot be contained, even with a globe-spanning supercontinent parsing its waters in two. But we haven't yet answered the question of who created the Grand Line at the start of the Sea Circle calendar, and I believe this is where our mythic sea dragon enters the picture. It's difficult to say exactly what it might mean, but there's a striking visual similarity between adult Momo's dragon form and the dragon statue which adorns Ryugu Castle on Fishman Island. Iconography in One Piece is important, and while Oda has often used Eastern dragons in his color spreads, he's far more intentional within the narrative itself. Fishman Island is heavily inspired by the Japanese fairy tale Urashima Taro, which tells the story of a fisherman who rescues a sea turtle from a group of children. Taro later learns that this small turtle is in fact Otohime, daughter of the Emperor of the Sea, Ryujin. He is then escorted to the underwater palace Ryugujo, which translates to the Palace of the Dragon God, where he is rewarded for his act of heroism. Taro remains under the sea for 3 days before returning to the surface. Before Taro departs from Ryugujo, Otohime gives him a mysterious box called the Temate Bako. Though Taro has only been gone for a short time, he returns home to find 3 centuries have passed on the surface. With his family and home lost to time, in great distress, Taro opens the Temate Bako, which produces a cloud of white smoke. The young fisherman, suddenly aged, then hears Otohime's voice cry out from the seafloor, "I warned you not to open the box, for inside was your old age." The parallels to the Fishman Island arc are immediately recognizable, though as discussed earlier, Oda always remixes the legends and folktales he draws on for inspiration. Much like Taro guided to the ocean floor by a large turtle, Luffy was guided to Fishman Island by Megalo, Shirahoshi's pet shark. the daughter of the Sea Emperor in the story of Orochimaru, served as the namesake for Queen Otohime in One Piece. The Tamate Baka, which also derives its name from the story, existed as a sacred treasure on Fishman Island, and quite similarly, Hody, Vanderdecken, and the rest of the new Fishman pirates were radically aged by consuming its contents. Ryugu Palace in One Piece, home to King Neptune, Shirahoshi, and the rest of the royal family, is named after Ryugu-jo, the underwater palace belonging to Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea and mythical protector of Japan. Now, the part of the story I want to focus on is the dragon god of the sea Ryujin. While most elements of the tale of Orochimaru have direct analogues in the story world of One Piece, the ruler of Ryugu-jo in Taro's tale is yet unaccounted for. King Neptune is the current sovereign of Fishman Island. His namesake is Neptune, god of the sea in Roman mythology. But the statue adorning Ryugu Palace, as well as its name, indicate the sea dragon god is somehow involved in this story, which is significant given Fishman Island's importance to the overarching conflict in the One Piece world. The visual similarity between the palace's design and Momonosuke's form further suggests that Ryujin in One Piece is somehow connected to the mythical fish devil fruit. Ryujin protects Japan in myth, and Wano being the One Piece version of Japan suggests further that the mythic fish fruit, or at least the form its wielder takes, somehow links Fishman Island to the land of Wano, which doesn't come as much of a surprise given both nations protected road poneglyphs and were allied in some way with Joy Boy. It's also interesting to note that this same figure can be seen in the baths on Alabasta and in the statue which once adorned the entrance to Onigashima. As noted earlier in the video, the dragon statue on Onigashima doesn't feature Kaido's extra set of horns, indicating it was meant to represent a different mythic dragon figure. Alabasta also protects a poneglyph, further indicating reverence for this figure connects those once allied with Joy Boy. What's most interesting is that this dragon figure appears to be revered in some form by both sides of the conflict which began in the Void Century. The world government has special interest in reacquiring or replicating Kaido's devil fruit, while the dragon form its wielder takes is apparently of great significance to the fishmen and potentially the people of Wano, as well as those on Alabasta, societies we know were once allied with Joy Boy, as they now protect road poneglyphs. We also see a serpentine figure in the hieroglyphs inside the crypts on Alabasta, which almost certainly hint toward the world's lost history. I also wonder if worshipping the giant snake or sea serpent on Jaya could be a distortion of the original practice, especially given that this practice also entailed human sacrifice, which probably wouldn't really resonate with Nika, the warrior of liberation. Based on their shared anatomical structure, I wonder if the snake could be a stand-in for the original sea dragon. I think above all else, what this suggests is that an analog to Ryujin, the mythic dragon god of the sea, must exist or have existed in the One Piece world, and the particular importance of the dragon devil fruit is predicated on its connection to this mythic figure. I wouldn't call this next point evidence as much as it is an interesting observation. Oda commissioned a large dragon statue identical to Momo's dragon form for his home's bathroom, which serves as a faucet for hot water. Oda's home is full of an eclectic mix of pop culture decorations, including a life-size Terminator and a shark head above his toilet. But this particular dragon statue could be significant. The fact that Oda chose to feature this dragon so prominently in his own home could further indicate the importance of this figure to the One Piece world, as it seems to be incredibly similar to the dragon head faucets from the bath on Alabasta, which I earlier suggested could reference the mythic sea dragon based on Ryujin. It's no secret Oda's career and story have taken inspiration from Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball. While the resemblance between the mythic dragon in One Piece and Shenron may be coincidental, since they're both based on the same mythological creature, Oda choosing to feature a mythic dragon in the prominent role I've proposed could be viewed as a fitting homage to one of the series which first inspired Oda to become a manga artist. Kaido's devil fruit is named the mythical fish fruit model Azure Dragon. Now it's important to note that the Azure Dragon in Japanese mythology is named Shiryu, so it's not synonymous with Ryujin. Shiryu, or the Azure Dragon in Japanese mythology, is considered one of the four guardian spirits or deities, the protector of the East. The Azure Dragon of the East is accompanied by the White Tiger of the West, the Black Tortoise of the North, the Vermilion Bird of the South, and the Yellow Dragon of the Center. But again, Oda mixes and matches when drawing inspiration from mythology. So while it's true that this dragon figure likely in part takes inspiration from Shiryu or the Azure Dragon, its presence atop Ryugu Palace means that it's not wholly drawing from this single myth. It's also taking inspiration from Ryujin, the Japanese dragon god of the sea. What this means is that Oda is combining elements from these two distinct myths to make something wholly unique within the One Piece world. We already know based on its name, the mythical fish model Azure Dragon fruit, that Kaido's power takes inspiration from the myth of the Dragon Gate. This dragon may also be revered on Elbaf, based on the figurehead of the Norse-themed ships sailed by the giants, but it's important to note the giants in One Piece take inspiration from real-world Norse mythology. Legends of sea serpents or dragons are fairly common all around the world. While the form and meaning of these serpentine symbols varies, the Norse myth of Jormungandr may offer an interesting parallel to Ryujin and Seiryu, and thus its role in helping to instigate Ragnarok could have been incorporated into Oda's design for the legendary sea dragon in One Piece. As noted, Ryujin is the deity of the sea in Japanese mythology, said to reside in the underwater palace Ryugujo. According to legend, Ryujin is able to assume human form and represents the power of the ocean. Matching some of the abilities demonstrated by Kaido, Ryujin is able to generate storms, bringing with him rain and thunder. Much like Shirahoshi's power over the Sea Kings, Ryujin is said to command sea creatures to do his bidding, and possesses jewels which allow him to control the tides. As an island nation, Japan historically held particular reverence for the sea, and as such, the ocean deity Ryujin was believed to be a benevolent spirit and guardian. Historically, Ryujin has even been worshipped or revered through a form of Shinto known as Ryujin Shinko. One Piece takes place in a world dominated by oceans, and the power of the sea is a recurrent motif. Oda even used this dragon figure to illustrate the pattern of the deep sea currents, further indicating a connection between this dragon and the power of the sea. Generally speaking, the sea in One Piece is representative of freedom. Ryugu Palace is adorned by a figure resembling Ryujin, and Fishman Island awaits a day when they will be guided to liberation to at last live under the real sun, indicating Ryujin is or was a figure associated with protecting the world's freedom. We also see the same serpentine dragon is used as the figurehead for Dragon's ship, the Wind Granma. This is particularly noteworthy as the Revolutionary Army is at war with the world government, intent on bringing about the world's liberation. The fruit which allows its wielder to assume the form of this legendary dragon is categorized as a mythical fish model, further connecting it to the sea. Yet those who possess devil fruit are also cursed by the power of the sea and are unable to swim. This same energy, described as the power of the sea, is imbued in the mineral sea stone, deposits of which are exclusively found on the island of Wano, the One Piece analog to Japan. Additionally, the three ancient weapons all seem to relate to the power of the sea. Pluton is a massive warship built to ride the waves, while Poseidon is the name assigned to the mermaid capable of issuing commands to the Sea Kings, massive sentient beings which inhabit the calm belts bordering the Grand Line. I believe the weapon Uranus somehow harnesses the power of the moon to control the tides and weather, similar to the jewels possessed by Ryujin. We can thus see that these three ancient weapons may also be tied to this mythic figure Ryujin. Perhaps most significantly, as discussed earlier in the video, the current epoch in the One Piece world is Kaien Reki, or the Age of the Sea Circle. The Grand Line, the legendary ocean route of dreams which guards the world's lost history, and the legendary treasure One Piece is the ultimate representation of the sea's power. Understanding the origin and importance of the Grand Line may thus prove critical in discovering the lost sea dragon Ryujin. So, to summarize, while we haven't quite arrived at a decisive conclusion regarding the legendary dragon's identity in the One Piece world, we can surmise that it may be revered throughout the Grand Line by Joy Boy's closest allies, and may even be shown deference by the world's current oppressors, the Celestial Dragons. It would seem reverence for this figure predates the Void Century, evidenced by the name of Ryugu Kingdom and the dragon statue's place of prominence atop the castle. The fact that an identical dragon statue once adorned the Torii Gate at the entrance to Onigashima further indicates that it was similarly revered on Wano. At this point, it's not yet clear why this figure was worshipped, but notably inspired by Shinto tradition and the myth of Ryujin, it would seem this dragon embodies or represents the power of the sea itself, which could be considered the dominant or ruling force in the One Piece world, evidenced by the nomenclature of the world's dating system, Kaien Reki, or the Age of the Sea Circle. In coming sections, we're going to explore all of these connections in depth, but perhaps it's no small coincidence that Kozuki Momonosuke has inherited the power of this legendary dragon before taking his rightful throne as Shogun of Wano, a land deeply connected to Joy Boy and the power of the sea, in which this dragon was regarded as a guardian deity. Luffy's recent awakening allows him to channel the power of the legendary warrior of liberation, Sun God Nika, representing Joy Boy's will. In so doing, he's poised to help realize the unfulfilled will of this fallen hero. Perhaps in similar fashion, Momo, who we know is destined to play an important part in delivering the world's new dawn, will awaken the power of the sea dragon to at last realize its will for the One Piece world. One Piece takes place in a world dominated by oceans, and the power of the sea is a recurrent motif. And here's where I think it's important to remember two things. First, Oda's cultural influence in writing One Piece. Japan is an island nation where all aspects of life are in some way impacted by the sea, and thus this fictional world was designed to be centered around seafaring pirates. Oda is a thoughtful and intentional author, and he's a grand architect when it comes to world building. It then makes sense that the central conflict in the story pits those who live in harmony with the sea against those who attempt to tame or control it. As Luffy said, he doesn't want to conquer or rule anything as the Pirate King, but to live a life of freedom, while those who constructed the Red Line wanted the exact opposite. It's very difficult to say without more information whether Ryujin was a real being or a myth used to characterize the Serpentine Sea Circle, but I lean toward the former. Ryugu Kingdom and Wano would have both played a critical role in facilitating free travel across the world and in gating entry to the Grand Line. Fishman Island is the nexus which connects the two halves of the world's ocean, and Wano, itself a massive fountain, could be viewed in some ways as the heart of a society or interconnected web of societies centered around the Grand Line. If this legendary figure could create the Grand Line, or at the very least direct its construction, then why could it not bring down the Red Line? Why are the mortal players involved in this story necessary? The frequency with which this symbol is seen, the particular locations where they are found, its Japanese mythological inspiration, and the symbolic importance of the overarching narrative all come together to tell us this dragon was important, and given the timeline of world events, I think it makes sense that a supernatural being embodying the power of the sea was responsible for creating the conditions which allowed the world to move toward freedom. Yet Ryujin left the actual task of liberating the world to mortal beings. But why is this the case? Well, it's very common in epic fantasy stories that supernatural or divine beings exercise limited influence on the mortal realm or only act under specific conditions. The Force and Wills in Star Wars, the Lion Turtles in the Avatar universe, and the Valar in Tolkien's Middle-earth series are all great examples. Gandalf's angelic divine powers were constrained by his mortal vessel, and he couldn't carry the Ring of Power to Mordor on Frodo's behalf. Beyond fiction, this is reflective of real-world myths and religious stories. These supernatural powers which be provide assistance, but they don't fight the battles for the mortal players because the hero's journey is more important than the destination. By this I mean it's important that the mortal players experience this journey for themselves. Luffy yelled at Usopp when he pried Rayleigh for information about the One Piece and threatened to quit the voyage on the spot, prompting a knowing smile to creep across the elder pirate's face because he recognized that this characteristic in part qualifies Luffy to someday succeed Roger as the next Pirate King. Rayleigh then advised Robin to wait and see through the voyage before learning the history of the world, and the reason is that the voyage itself is transformative. Completing this voyage will inevitably shape their perspective on what they ultimately learn.
You need to finish what you started.
Why?
Because a leader can't lead until he knows where he's going.
Without the journey, without the struggle to attain knowledge or power, it may be taken for granted. By that I mean to say that moral fortitude is reinforced by grappling with difficult choices. The hero's journey isn't easy, it's incredibly difficult and dangerous. There's a very real risk of loss, injury, death, or even worse. But there's a greater risk in not taking the voyage, because the invaluable treasure earned can only be found on the road of adventure. Consider this. In biomechanics, there is a principle called Wolff's Law, which in essence states that bones remodel according to the mechanical load placed upon them. If bones sustain greater stress by carrying more weight, over time, they remodel proportionally, increasing in strength such that they can withstand greater loading. This is fairly intuitive. You lift weights to get stronger. You run to increase stamina.
Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something.
Well, the same principle applies to moral character. The same applies to a world or a society. The spiritual world beyond the physical is ineffable, beyond human comprehension. The Book of Isaiah, part of the canon in both Jewish and Christian beliefs, states plainly that God's ways are not man's ways. Now, I'm not saying the sea dragon in One Piece is a god, but I would surmise it exercises some type of spiritual or supernatural power. I should reiterate here that Oda does not map the characters in his story one-to-one on myths and folktales he draws on for inspiration, so though I keep referring to this dragon as Ryujin, it may go by a different name and exhibit different characteristics from the legend on which it's based. At this point, your guess is as good as mine what the restrictions might be on this proposed legendary sea dragon Ryujin in One Piece, but that doesn't mean his influence cannot be seen. The Grand Line can guide the world toward freedom, but it can't fight the battle directly. It can only equip the people of the One Piece world with the tools they need to liberate themselves. Indeed, we see that those handed unearned power often abuse it. Within the One Piece world, this is exemplified by the Celestial Dragons who presently hold the reins of power. Their position of absolute authority is passed down as a birthright, and they in turn believe themselves to be superior to their subjects. Conversely, Roger chose not to handpick his successor, and instead left fate to decide the person most fit to inherit his will and his treasure. The one who follows in Roger's footsteps needs to undertake the same voyage to become worthy of inheriting his mantle, and it isn't about the pride of being self-made. The fundamental transformation birthed by the journey is necessary to strengthen the future Pirate King physically, mentally, and morally. This is the reason Rayleigh told the Straw Hats they need to see the world before learning the true history. They need to grow strong enough to survive the challenges on the road, but also must understand the true gravity of their actions. The Grand Line is the gift of the Sea Dragon, a globe-spanning stretch of ocean which is designed to protect freedom and raise up a hero or group of heroes capable of transforming the world for the better. On the surface, One Piece may appear to be a lighthearted search for lost treasure, and while it remains every bit as whimsical and entertaining as when Luffy first set sail from Dawn Island, Oda has been slowly constructing an epic fantasy masterpiece which pits the forces of good and evil, light and darkness, freedom and oppression against one another in a war to decide the fate of this world of pirates. We see this reflected in the day and night or sun and moon symbols Oda uses to characterize this overarching conflict. Luffy is a warrior of liberation, representative of the sun. He possesses the power of the mythic sun god Nika, was born on Dawn Island, sails aboard the ship Thousand Sunny, and is destined to fulfill many long-held prophecies by delivering the world's new dawn. The world has awaited a hero for centuries, if not millennia, with the night or darkness signifying the world's oppressors, the enemies of freedom. During this long dark night, the moon represents hope, as signified by Joy Boy's closest friends and allies around the world. The Minks are powered up by the full moon, the clans of Wano all have names based on the moon, the fishmen dream of someday walking the path toward the sun, the giants celebrate the winter solstice to mark the death and rebirth of the sun, and those who carry the name D are considered enemies of these self-proclaimed false gods who presently hold power. Their name could reference the half moon, hidden by the clouds, as a symbol of fellowship and hope. It's important to understand what this symbolism signifies, because it tells us that despite his protests to the contrary, One Piece tells the story of Luffy's hero's journey, unifying it in structure with an untold number of mythic stories. You are likely already familiar in some form with the cyclic pattern of the hero's journey.
A hero is born out of a childhood trauma or out of a disaster that must be avenged.
You're thinking of a superhero.
We all have a hero in our heart.
Importantly, the hero's journey is descriptive rather than prescriptive. It's not a formula or cookie-cutter mold for telling stories. Evaluating stories through the lens of the hero's journey or the mythic structure outlined by Campbell offers us a loose heuristic, meaning not all stories perfectly conform to all elements of this pattern.
The code is more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
In The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell distilled what he described as the monomyth, a universal structure which underlies myths, folktales, and fictional stories told in societies around the world and throughout time. Based on his work in comparative mythology, Campbell's assertion is that this mythic structure arises spontaneously through storytelling because it is representative of our inner being, or psyche, as well as our place as individual beings within the cosmos. Tales based on this mythic structure are thus popularized because they are so deeply resonant. The basic structure of the hero's journey is first departure from the known or ordinary world into one of mystery and adventure. On the road, the hero recruits allies, faces challenges, and ultimately must undergo a great ordeal in order to be transformed and rewarded with a gift or treasure which can be used for the betterment of the ordinary world from which they first departed. The last phase of the journey is the return. The transformed hero returns to the ordinary world equipped with the gift or treasure acquired on their adventure and empowered to face the final challenge, which may entail improving or transforming the society or the broader story world. The exact terms used to define the steps of the hero's journey vary, but the general pattern is consistent: an inward journey of self-reflection, catalyzed by an adventure into the unknown, transformation and improvement, and then return, marked by an outward struggle to synthesize and reintegrate the transformed hero with the world. Despite the simplicity and universality of this model, there are seemingly limitless ways to retell stories patterned on the monomyth. Many popular works of fiction, including Star Wars, Harry Potter, and importantly One Piece, are heavily based on the monomyth. In Hollywood, following the success of Star Wars, the hero's journey has been frequently and intentionally used as a blueprint for screenwriting. As noted by Christopher Vogler in The Writer's Journey, even a film as unconventional as Pulp Fiction contains distinct elements of this mythic structure.
And I am the tyranny of evil men. But I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd.
While some writers intentionally pattern their tales on the mythic structure outlined by Campbell and Vogler, others do so subconsciously. Honestly, I believe Oda likely falls into the latter category. It's unlikely One Piece's adherence to the mythic structure of the hero's journey is intentional or deliberate. Thus, the hero's journey describes an emergent, spontaneous pattern in storytelling. Just as the structure of stories may be based on immutable universal patterns, so too are many of the character archetypes which inhabit works of fiction.
If you live long enough, you see the same eyes in different people.
Campbell was himself influenced by the work of Carl Jung, who proposed the existence of archetypal forces emergent from what he described as the collective unconscious.
I should warn you, while Fraser is a Freudian, I am a Jungian. So there'll be no blaming Mother today.
You might think of this as shared source code. We're all conscious beings running on the same operating system and have the same potential for good and evil. These archetypes are ancient patterns of personality to which individuals may conform. They manifest in the real world, taking different shapes or forms when filtered through the subjective lens of the individual. The archetypes are thus likened to masks picked up and worn by individuals over the course of their life. Individual people or characters may manifest elements of multiple archetypes simultaneously or at different points in time.
We all change. When you think about it, we are all different people all through our lives. And that's okay, that's good, you've got to keep moving so long as you remember all the people that you used to be.
Take a snapshot of any civilization in any part of the world at any point in time, and though the faces of individuals manifesting these archetypes will be different, you will invariably see the same patterns of personality represented. The hero, the mentor, the shadow, and so on. In fiction, character archetypes may be used to fulfill specific defined narrative or thematic functions. The meeting with the mentor is a common facet of hero myths, as described by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Campbell referred to the common form adopted by this archetypal figure as the helpful crone or the fairy godmother. But the mentor appears in many shapes and sizes, commonly exemplified throughout popular works of fiction. Archetypal mentor figures often provide supernatural aid and help conduct the protagonist from their ordinary world onto the road of adventure and change. Shanks, Rayleigh, Kozaburo, Koshiro, Bellamere, Zeph, Hiruluk, Kureha, Clover, Saul, Tom, Tiger, Otohime, Pedro, Ushimaru, and Rocinante all serve as examples of characters who positively mentored members of the Straw Hat Pirates, present and potentially future, as well as their closest allies, by providing guidance and direction at pivotal moments in their lives. Commonly in myth, the mentor imparts special knowledge or gifts which equip the hero for their journey, and accordingly we have frequently seen mentor figures in One Piece serve this particular function. Shanks not only acted as a role model for Luffy by instilling in him positive moral values, he's also responsible for indirectly providing him the Gomu Gomu fruit and for gifting Luffy his treasured straw hat, an object later implied to have greater significance than has been fully revealed. Often those who wear the mask of the mentor once underwent their own hero's journey, as we see represented in Rayleigh, Roger's former first mate, who later in life guided Luffy and instructed him for 2 years while the crew was separated. We have seen repeatedly that the positive influence of the mentor has been instrumental in shaping the Straw Hats into the heroes they are slowly becoming. However, Oda has also subverted this relationship model through his villain characters, particularly in the New World. The inversion of the mentor-mentee relationship is fundamentally predatory and acts as a corrupting influence. Big Mom, Doflamingo, Orochi, and Kanjuro were all guided onto their current paths by dark mentors who approached them at vulnerable points in their lives. Importantly, we have seen increasing thematic focus on cycles of abuse and hatred exemplified through these dark mentor bonds. For example, Treble radicalized young Doflamingo and shaped him into an underworld broker. In the mold of the mentor, he even gifted Dofi his devil fruit and the weapon used to assassinate his father Homing. As an adult, Doflamingo later recognized in young Law the same hatred which resided in his own heart, and attempted to corrupt Law in similar fashion. We thus see a growing trend in the New World of dark mentor figures responsible for creating the monsters with whom Luffy and crew come into conflict. These villains were abused or manipulated to varying degrees, but later became abusers and corrupting dark mentors themselves, passing on the will they inherited and perpetuating the pattern through successive generations. Notably, just as we have seen those abused or manipulated turn into abusers and manipulators, we have also seen the cyclical pattern of positive mentorship as a counterbalancing force for good in the One Piece world. Those who have been positively mentored in turn pass on the will they have inherited to others. In fact, this is one of the central themes of the entire series and the mechanism by which One Piece and the true history have been guarded for centuries: inherited will. We can even see the pattern of positive mentorship represented through members of the Straw Hat Pirates. Luffy's values and dreams were shaped by his childhood encounters with Shanks, and now as he draws very near to assuming the mantle of Pirate King, Luffy has taken up the role of mentor to Momonosuke and Tama. In fact, though he maintains his lovably goofy and carefree demeanor, Luffy has significantly matured in the New World and grown into his newfound position of leadership. Throughout the raid on Onigashima, Luffy has never lost sight of his goal or the stakes involved, and has been instrumental in helping Momonosuke reach his true potential. On Fishman Island, Luffy said he didn't want to be viewed as a hero, and in typical Luffy fashion, used a food-based metaphor to explain his rationale. Because, you see, a hero is a person who shares their meat, and Luffy just wants to eat his fill and then some.
I don't care what they say about me, I just want to eat.
But this same metaphor has been used to demonstrate Luffy's maturation as he has battled against two Emperors of the Sea, Big Mom and Kaido, on their home turf. He went from Whole Cake Island, a land of feast and excessive indulgence, to Wano, a vast and desolate land of famine. Despite Luffy downplaying his heroic qualities a few arcs earlier by insisting on his own desire to overindulge his appetite, inspired by meeting Tama, he's now actively fighting to make Wano a land where no one will go hungry, and was enraged by the Beast Pirates wasting Oshiruko because Tama and the other people of Wano have been forced to go without for so long. Shanks' values inspired Luffy, and now he's passing on those same values to a new generation. We have also seen that this cyclic pattern of hatred and abuse can be broken, and I suspect these themes and recurrent motifs have been intentionally introduced because they have global significance to the broader One Piece world. Law managed to avert the trap of the heavenly demon spider because a force for good entered his life at a critical moment, and even then it further took reinforcement and assistance from Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates for him to finally break free from Doflamingo's grasp. That ray of hope is exactly what the Straw Hat Pirates represent. As Vivi said to the crowd in Alubarna when she set out to sea to infiltrate Baroque Works and dismantle Crocodile's plot, in the darkness of the storm, she encountered a ship and crew which gave her a push and encouraged her to see the light. The Straw Hat Pirates, sailing aboard their ship Thousand Sunny, travel the seas in pursuit of impossible dreams, and along the way bring light to the dark places they visit. A new dawn is coming for the One Piece world, and I suspect that when the true history is revealed, we will learn that this cycle of abuse and manipulation has been perpetuated in the halls of power for centuries, if not millennia. But importantly, the implicit issue not yet addressed in discussing the pattern of victims becoming villains and reproducing others in their same mold is primordial evil, or original sin. It's all well and fine to say evil begets evil, but there must have been a true origin point. We know the cycle can be broken, that a new dawn can rise on dark seas, and that individuals can change. But what is the source of corruption in the One Piece world? When and how did this cycle begin? Who does Luffy need to punch to make the world better? The mortal players currently inhabiting the stage didn't start the fire. No, they didn't light it, but they tried to fight it. Kaido, Big Mom, and even Teach represent localized rather than global evil. They are symptoms, but not the disease. What evil lies at the heart of the One Piece world, and how must it be confronted? Luffy is currently on the road of challenges where he meets allies and faces enemies in the archetypal molds of the Shadow and the Threshold Guardian in preparation for his great ordeal, transformation following discovery of One Piece. The last part of the story is a separate voyage of return, the Great War foreshadowed by Whitebeard, precipitated by rising up to challenge the world and shoulder the burden of history in the way Roger never could. The trials have become harder for the Straw Hats, not only because their enemies have grown stronger, but because their enemies' motivations have become more complex, and they have challenged the crew to see the bigger picture, to widen their focus to the broader conflicts in the One Piece world around them, as well as the deep-rooted systems which continually produce villains in the same mold. Because the Straw Hats are now grappling not only with powerful pirates standing in the way of them achieving their personal goals, but also with entrenched systems perpetuated by the very same forces, inherited will, dreams, and fate, which propel them toward Laugh-Tale. And this is by design. The Straw Hats need to face their own dark side, so to speak, before they will be ready to rise up and challenge the world. In fiction, the archetypal shadow is most often representative of the hero's own dark potential. For example, in Star Wars, Darth Vader is a representation of what Luke could become if he turns to the dark side. Within the world of One Piece, Blackbeard fills the role of the hero's shadow to Luffy. Like Luffy, Teach also pursues impossible dreams, is guided by the hand of fate, and seeks to maximize personal freedom. Yet Teach is Luffy's moral antithesis in that though he may want the same things as Luffy, he has repeatedly demonstrated his willingness to lie, cheat, steal, and murder to achieve his goals. He's not Luffy's thematic foil, but as the hero's shadow, questions the validity of the virtues Luffy espouses and demonstrates the dark potential of Luffy's dream and ambition. I bring up this topic because, importantly, the Shadow, the main character's evil opposite, is most often not synonymous with or directly representative of the cosmic source of primordial evil within the story world. Reusing the Star Wars example, Darth Vader is Luke's shadow, but the Emperor is the ultimate source of evil, the one who tempted Vader to the dark side and sought to subdue Luke in similar fashion. This distinction is important because the way the protagonist reconciles the conflict with the Shadow is often quite different from the destruction or mitigation of the primordial evil force. This is sort of intuitive. The Shadow is a representation of the protagonist's potential internal evil, while the latter is an external evil force which attacks and corrupts the entire ecosystem of the story world. The New World is the last leg of the voyage before Luffy and crew will be equipped with heavily guarded knowledge and power to confront this primordial evil, and thus are first being challenged by the Shadow archetype, antagonists like Kaido, Big Mom, and Teach. In One Piece, those like Kaido who failed to break the chain, who were taken in and persuaded by an evil influencer, are tragic in their own way, even if they aren't portrayed in a sympathetic light. Learning about the history of the Sun Pirates did nothing to soften readers' view of Arlong, for example, but we are now better able to understand how he became such a monster and to recognize the inherent tragedy that in a different set of circumstances he may have been much different. We further see through Hody Jones that the true form of evil is the entrenched pattern which continuously produces villains in the same mold. We thus later see both how this pattern perpetuates and, importantly, how it can be broken. Luffy, like Roger and Joy Boy before him, walks the path of the cyclic hero's journey. Importantly, the hero's journey is a microcosm of what Joseph Campbell referred to as the cosmogonic cycle. In myth, the cyclic journey is undertaken by both individuals who pick up and wear the mask of the hero, as well as the society or the story world as a whole. Thus, the cosmogonic cycle may be understood to represent the pattern or arc of destruction and recreation of the universe, the world, or a society. In The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell wrote, "Schism in the soul, schism in the body social, will not be resolved by any scheme of return to the good old days, archaism, or by programs guaranteed to render an ideal projected future, futurism, or even by the most realistic, hard-headed work to weld together again the deteriorating elements. Only birth can conquer death, the birth not of the old thing again, but of something new. When our day is come for the victory of death, death closes in. There is nothing we can do except be crucified and resurrected, dismembered totally, and then reborn." The narrative pattern of the cosmogonic cycle is described by Campbell as the waking from deep sleep emanation, followed by dissolution back into the world of dream. The known world, the society, emanates forth from the source of creation, then dissolves back into a dreamlike state, a process likened to death and rebirth. Fittingly, Oda has used day and night or sun and moon symbolism to characterize the central narrative arc throughout the series. The world is presently in a state of night and waiting for a future promised day, a new dawn. Luffy, born on Dawn Island, set sail in the first chapter titled Romance Dawn, and has gathered a crew aboard his ship, the Thousand Sunny. Together they bring light to the dark places they visit, and someday very soon will fulfill these many long-held prophecies. Make no mistake, Luffy is a fated hero, and as stated in the first chapter, the story of One Piece is Luffy's voyage of destiny. The reign of the Sea Circle is memorialized by the world's dating system, and though the Sea Circle was formed 1500 years ago, it wasn't until the year 600 Kaienreki when one with the requisite qualities first arrived at the end of the line. This brings us to the most interesting and tumultuous era in the One Piece world timeline, the Void Century. Over time, it has become increasingly clear that Joy Boy was the central figure during the Void Century, but who was this enigmatic figure? Answering the question of Joy Boy's identity is the key to unraveling the mystery of the world's lost epoch. Simply put, I believe Joy Boy was the first forgotten pirate king.
Wow. You don't have to say wow, I know it's wow.
There are numerous reasons why I believe this to be the case, but it's important to remember that ultimately, this tale takes place in a world of pirates. It thus stands to reason that the central figure of the world's forgotten past was himself a pirate in the same mold as Roger and Luffy. I would like to first direct your attention to a passage included in one of the extra pages in the first volume of the series. A narration box accompanying a color illustration of Shanks, Buggy, and other silhouetted pirates reads, "It was an age burning with the magnificence of those searching for the treasure of treasures. One Piece, hidden by Gold Roger, history's only king of pirates. It was an age when pirates beyond number raised their flags to battle for fame and fortune. It was a golden age." As far as history is concerned, no one was ever declared Pirate King before Roger. This statement would at first glance seem to dismiss any notion that a previous pirate king preceded Goldie Roger, if not for the fact that this story takes place in a world where a significant chapter of history has been erased. Referring to history's only anything in a world where a chapter of history has been erased is immediately suspect and suggests another may have once existed and been forgotten. But this isn't our only clue that there was another pirate king before Roger. The best evidence that Joy Boy was a pirate in the same mold as Roger and Luffy can be found in the lyrics to the song Bank Sake, which, as I have detailed in previous videos, in part tells the tale of Joy Boy's voyage. It describes a crew of pirates beset by tumultuous seas whose faith must be placed in the morning sun, a new dawn which will eventually rise. Joy Boy could have been a pirate, an adventurer, any number of things, but the mention of the Jolly Roger strongly indicates the flag of piracy indeed sailed from his mast. The song clearly describes a group of pirates and refers to proudly sailing the Jolly Roger, so if indeed this song describes Joy Boy, then he must have been a pirate. There's one more interesting detail to note. The song alludes to all sailing toward the end of the sea. Now this is interesting because in the current Great Age of Pirates, Roger's words inspired the world to pursue the treasure One Piece, but in chapter 966, Roger indicated that the legend of the great treasure on the final island preceded him, as this is what motivated his own circumnavigation of the globe. It's natural to assume Joy Boy is the one who left behind One Piece, but it's important to pay careful attention to Roger's exact words in chapter 967. While it's certainly possible Joy Boy is the one who placed One Piece at the end of the Grand Line, Roger doesn't outright confirm this. In this scene, the former Pirate King says, "Oh Joy Boy, I wish I'd been born in your time. This is quite a treasure you've left behind. A tale full of laughs." So notice, Roger does say Joy Boy left behind quite a treasure, which could be referring to One Piece itself, but then he quickly follows that statement with the phrase, "a tale full of laughs," which perhaps indicates Joy Boy's contribution to the great treasure was simply his story. That isn't to say the treasure itself is the story, but I'm suggesting One Piece may be older still than Joy Boy and something he too discovered like Roger. What remains unclear is why Joy Boy and many others would have been sailing toward the final island during the Void Century. Luffy is seeking Laugh Tale because of the legend of One Piece. Roger was seeking the final island because of an even older legend of a lost treasure. But what inspired Joy Boy? What was he hoping to find? It's possible that no such prompting was necessary. The allure of the unknown, the romance of adventure, and the promise of being the first in history to attain the unattainable could have been all that was required.
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
George Mallory, an English mountaineer who took part in the first 3 expeditions to Mount Everest, is famously quoted as having said, when asked why he sought to climb the world's tallest mountain, "Because it's there." Odin, Roger, and Luffy all embarked with similar motivation, to discover what exists on the infinite horizon. This innate desire is what conducted them from their ordinary, familiar lives onto the fantastical road of adventure. But what truly qualifies them as heroes is that they recognized and responded to the call of destiny. The first leg of Odin's voyage with Whitebeard was carefree and aimless, but he later changed teams and sailed with Roger with a decided purpose. I don't think we can say anything for certain at this point, but based on the evidence, Joy Boy may have undertaken a voyage similar in nature to Roger and Luffy. We must ask whether he too was searching for something at the end of the sea. So could the treasure One Piece be as old as the Grand Line itself? Nothing yet refutes this possibility. Roger indicated the treasure Joy Boy left behind was his tale full of laughs, and thus it's possible One Piece was simply discovered by Joy Boy in similar fashion to Roger. If Joy Boy is indeed made from the same mold as Luffy and Roger, then perhaps he too was transformed by his voyage. After seeing and understanding the world and discovering the One Piece, he developed a vision for a world transformed, which could only be realized by the King of Pirates. Okay, so Joy Boy was the first pirate king. But what is a king without a kingdom? And what type of kingdom would befit a king of pirates? Well, it just so happens a forgotten kingdom rose to prominence and was destroyed during the Void Century, not so coincidentally referred to as Joy Boy's era. The fact that the Sea Circle was seemingly created 600 years before Joy Boy's era indicates it had a purpose in guiding the world toward freedom before the cataclysmic war of the Void Century and the rise of the world government. My assertion is that the sea dragon deity potentially revered on Fishman Island, Wano, and Alabasta was responsible for directing the Grand Line's creation and thus perhaps also originated the legend of the treasure at the end of the sea. Perhaps the Grand Line was originally created to raise up a leader capable of guiding the world toward liberty, and Joy Boy was the first to arrive at this mythic location, the first to boast the title Pirate King, and the first to envision a world transformed. But how did Joy Boy try to change the world, and what did he envision? Why did the world demand a champion of freedom in an era which preceded the formation of the world government? The reign of the Lunarians might have ended in year 0, but the red wall dividing the world's oceans didn't fall at that time, and as such, whether or not there was a centralized oppressive force in the world, there was nevertheless an imperative for change. And that's exactly what I believe Joy Boy was trying to accomplish as the first Pirate King. But here we need to understand what piracy means in the world of One Piece. What does it mean to be the king of pirates, and why is this monarch the only one who can bring about the type of change the world requires?
I am the Pirate King, and it is a glorious thing to be a Pirate King.
Oda's author comments from the opening page of Volume 1 are potentially revealing. In order to write a story of pirates, I've been gathering a lot of sources on pirates and reading them, but none state of a pirate who dreamed of becoming one in their young days. Seems like they were having so much fun that they forgot to mention themselves in history. Gosh, this is why pirates are such a pain. This is essentially a lighthearted remark about pirates' negligence in recording tales of their voyage, making Oda's task of doing research more difficult, but also grants us some important insight into Oda's creative process by revealing the original seed of an idea which grew into this massive pirate epic, a young boy who dreams of piracy. This is unusual, because piracy is not traditionally viewed as a virtue worth aspiring towards. The more familiar bloodthirsty cutthroats which populate past pirate stories are present in the world of One Piece, but represent a moral antithesis to the central protagonists. This reminds me of a quote from Stephen King's book On Writing, a memoir of the craft. In discussing the origin or source of his inspiration for his novels, he states the following: "I get my ideas from everywhere, but what all of my ideas boil down to is seeing maybe one thing. But in a lot of cases, it's seeing two things, and having them come together in some new and interesting way, and then adding the question, what if? What if is always the key question." In Volume 2, Oda discusses his childhood love of a cartoon called Vicky the Viking, which contributed to his interest in telling a seafaring adventure story when he grew older. Oda gathered a lot of sources on pirates in preparation for writing One Piece, but the story really distinguishes itself from others which tackle similar subject matter by injecting an atypical protagonist. In the world of One Piece, Roger's final words served as a call to adventure, an inciting incident for people around the world. Oda wanted to create a story about a young person who dreamed of becoming a pirate. This was the spark, the what if, which resulted in the original premise for the story of One Piece. What could spur not only one young person, but the entire world to dream of piracy? The death of the Pirate King and the mystery of the legendary treasure One Piece were the narrative answer. The creation of One Piece can thus be characterized as the collision of two ideas: a seafaring adventure story filled with pirates in search of lost treasure, and a coming-of-age hero's journey for a young, good-natured protagonist who dreams of becoming the king of pirates. To reconcile an idealistic hero like Luffy with the traditionally sordid world of pirates, Oda created a world where piracy may be considered an ideal, even a necessity. A world where the societal structure has tilted toward tyranny, and thus breaking from said institutions by becoming an outlaw may be seen as noble or virtuous if the freedom such liberation entails is used for the betterment and protection of others.
Perhaps on the rare occasion pursuing the right course demands an act of piracy. Piracy itself can be the right course.
Piracy in the world of One Piece is a representation of freedom from the constraints of ordinary society, an act which may be seen as a moral imperative in a world governed by an oppressive force.
It's how you look at Buccaneers that makes them bad or good, and I see us as members of a noble brotherhood.
Thus, the Pirate King may be understood as the paragon or ultimate champion of freedom. In an epoch of history which predates the current totalitarian regime, it's difficult to say whether piracy as it exists in the One Piece world currently would have been viewed in the same light, whether choosing to wave the Jolly Roger would have signified the same meaning to the world, which is why it was so important we earlier established that the world's primordial oppressor was already at work long before the Void Century. This tells us that Joy Boy, the world's first Pirate King, had something to oppose, and it also demonstrates that Oda has designed his world to accommodate a noble pirate serving as the ultimate force for good, and the hero the age demands. The influence of history, religion, myths, and folklore as sources of inspiration has been a recurrent topic of conversation throughout this video. Oda stated in the first volume that in preparation for writing One Piece, he researched all sorts of pirate stories, and on that note, one particular pirate legend stands out as potential inspiration for Joy Boy and the Forgotten Kingdom, which rose to prominence during the Void Century. There is a utopian myth of a purported pirate colony called Libertalia. This rumored pirate's paradise was said to have been founded by Captain James Mission, sometimes also referred to as Olivier Mission, in Madagascar during the 17th century. Most historians doubt Libertalia actually existed, and thus it is viewed as a utopian legend. The name of this rumored pirate nation comes from the Latin word liberi, which means free, and accordingly, legend said Mission's idea was to create a society in which people of all colors, creeds, and beliefs could live freely under the protection of the pirate lords. In Villains of All Nations, Pirates of the Golden Age, Marcus Rediker described the supposed Libertalian pirates as vigilant guardians of people's rights and liberties, and barriers against the rich and powerful. French pirate James Mission sailed aboard a ship called Victory, and his utopia sailed a white flag instead of a Jolly Roger, united under the phrase "for God and liberty." We know the 20 kings banded together to combat what Clover described as a vast forgotten kingdom which rose to prominence during the Void Century. He went so far as to assert the primary motivation for the erasure of history was to hide the very existence of this nation, and given the prominent role Joy Boy seems to have played in the Void Century era, I believe he may have been the sovereign of a pirate nation patterned on the fabled tale of Libertalia, where he tried to unite the various island nations of the world to fight for freedom. But freedom from what? Remember, Joy Boy's era precedes the world government. Much earlier in the video, we discussed character archetypes, repeated patterns of personality seen in disparate societies throughout time. Though the names and faces change, the forms remain the same. The world government and celestial dragons are the form presently assumed by the oppressive force and thus are the enemies Luffy must combat. The government, as it exists presently, wasn't around in Joy Boy's era, but their underlying ideology, the desire to stamp out freedom, surely did, and that's what Joy Boy attempted to change as the Pirate King. The world before the Void Century was not an idyllic utopia, and thus, the free nation of pirates Joy Boy was trying to create likely represents an incomplete goal or aspiration, which for some reason failed.
Oh, well, I tried to start a revolution but didn't print enough pamphlets, so hardly anyone turned up.
I believe much like Mission's mythic kingdom of Libertalia, Joy Boy flew the flag of piracy to represent freedom. Much like the emperors in the modern era, he proclaimed himself protector of many island nations, and thus the ancient kingdom could be considered a loose affiliation of many nations all around the world. It's even possible Joy Boy considered a particular island the center of his kingdom, so to speak, much like the emperors who each have islands which serve as a sort of capital for their territories. In that sense, perhaps Wano was at the heart of Joy Boy's kingdom based on its deep connection to the sea. Wano is a fountain from which water flows, and it sits on rich deposits of sea stone. We now know for certain that the Forgotten Kingdom possessed advanced technology, but this doesn't necessarily pertain to the ancient Wano now hidden beneath the waves. I proposed Wano was the heart of this Forgotten Kingdom, in the sense that it may have been tied in some special way to Joy Boy and the mythic sea dragon, evidenced by its deposits of sea stone. But that doesn't necessarily imply it would have once been home to the same type of futuristic technology found on Egghead. As I said, it's possible this kingdom extended throughout the entire Grand Line. Inuarashi said Roger reached a realization about the civilization which gave rise to the poneglyphs on Lodestar Island. So perhaps the Grand Line's natural endpoint is where Vegapunk's Void Century analog brought to life these technological marvels lost to the mists of time. Odin insisted that Wano's borders must be open for Joy Boy's impending return, and while this likely refers to the symbolic arrival of someone like Roger and Luffy who shares in Joy Boy's vision, the use of the term return is interesting. It's no surprise Joy Boy would have once visited Wano, but Kaido insisted this land is special, and Sengoku told Sakazuki it's no small coincidence so many of the world's most famous pirates like Roger, Whitebeard, Odin, Kaido, Big Mom, and now Luffy were somehow connected to Wano. This could even explain the large straw hat hidden away in Imu's vault in Mari Joie if it was created for a Joy Boy in Amigasa village. Perhaps the hat passed down from Roger to Shanks and from Shanks to Luffy is nothing more than a hero's hat replica of the original. The identical, much larger version hidden in Imu's vault would then be nothing more than an ordinary hat, kept as a memento from Imu's seemingly vanquished foe. Kaido's new Onigashima project intends to make Wano the capital of a nation of pirates, and thus serves as a dark mirror for the world Joy Boy was trying to create. Much emphasis has recently been placed on the fact that Kaido believes himself to be the only one capable of changing the world, but apparently at some point he came to believe he wasn't the one fit to become Joy Boy. Perhaps the reason he selected Wano as the center of his territory is because the land of samurai was once the heart of Joy Boy's kingdom of pirates, and thus the return of Joy Boy signifies in part the arrival of one who will finish what Joy Boy could not, and reclaim Wano as the heart of a new pirate nation. This is something I touched on earlier in the discussion regarding the hero's shadow and character archetypes. I believe the return of Joy Boy signifies the arrival of someone who wants to transform the world as did Joy Boy. As Pirate King, Joy Boy was not an idle ruler. He built a network of people who desired freedom all over the world, and they banded together to actively effect change. We saw this very sentiment expressed in Kaido and Albert's first meeting on Punk Hazard. Kaido wanted to change the world. Luffy, Blackbeard, Kaido, Big Mom, and potentially even Law and Kid are rivals competing to not only succeed Roger as Pirate King, but to represent Joy Boy's return. After all, Roger's treasure is in truth Joy Boy's treasure. Like Big Mom, Kaido is a person who believes he's capable of changing the world, and indeed, that is exactly what the one who assumes Joy Boy's mantle must do to bring about the global new dawn. Kaido and Big Mom's respective visions for this coming new era vary dramatically, but importantly, neither are fit to be Joy Boy because the ideal projected futures they want to create by becoming Pirate King deviate from that which Joy Boy may have been trying to achieve. As shadows of the hero, elements of their dreams or ambitions are shades or dark mirrored reflections of that which Joy Boy hoped to accomplish, and this is by design. Because these characters represent the dark potential of what the hero in the mold of Luffy, Roger, or Joy Boy could become. Big Mom's dream in particular draws elements from the Libertalia myth, a pirate kingdom ruled over by an emperor of the sea in which people of all creeds, races, and religions can live in harmony. But Big Mom's utopian vision, taking inspiration from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, is warped into a twisted dystopian Candyland by Big Mom's critical flaw, the voracious appetite and deep-rooted emotional trauma which cause her to abuse her subjects. Her vision is pure, but corrupted by the cruel means she employs to get what she wants. Harmony isn't a virtue unless people choose it for themselves, which I believe the mythic sea dragon who created the Grand Line well understood. Kaido's attempt to build a pirate nation and start a global war similarly represent a distortion of Joy Boy's goals. As Whitebeard indicated, a war is coming, because the world's oppressors will not give up their power and cease their plans to further subjugate the One Piece world without a fight. Moral character and strength of will are important, but make no mistake, the forces Luffy and the Straws need to face are also incredibly powerful. The entire purpose of the 2-year time skip was to physically prepare them for the dangers of the new world. The crisis on Sabaody, Luffy's incursion into Impel Down, and his inability to rescue Ace at the Battle of Marineford all demonstrated the importance of being strong enough to protect others, and to stand against overwhelmingly powerful adversaries. Kaido's mistake is in asserting strength as the paramount virtue, and as such, he wants to start and perpetuate a global war to create a world in which only the strong can live while the weak perish or submit. Anyone who submits admits their place in this pecking order.
Alright, maggots, listen up. Popo's about to teach you the pecking order.
And defers to the alpha at the top of the pack of beasts, is free to be part of Kaido's in-group, and challenge for dominance is constantly invited, with death completing a warrior's path. Kaido holds strength as the highest virtue and envisions a world where the entire society is structured around its supremacy. Higurushi even references survival of the fittest, a phrase which in the real world originates from Darwinian evolutionary theory to describe the process of natural selection. At least outwardly, Kaido doesn't seem to particularly care if people hate him, including his subjects, his subordinates, and even his own child, as long as they submit to his leadership on the basis of his being the more powerful warrior. His words to Yamato imply he regards this as justifiable, which doesn't mean Kaido's values are correct, but does imply he views his actions as somehow necessary and beneficial to others or the larger world, rather than just himself. Kaido doesn't necessarily view the wake of death and destruction his actions would precipitate as detrimental because he places greater value on those who would possess the strength to survive. In Kaido's eyes, war is a necessary catalyst for the strong to deservedly live and the weak to deservedly die. The very first words which appear in the narration boxes accompanying Kaido's introduction in chapter 795 read, "The strong live and the weak die. That is the only rule of this world." These are the first words Oda chose to associate with Kaido, and thus they likely fundamentally inform his worldview. Kaido seems to have no other framework for valuing individuals beyond strength, and because he's regarded as the strongest living creature, no one else quite measures up. From the brief glimpse of his childhood, it's clear the importance of strength above all else was instilled in him from a very young age, likely by a dark mentor figure. The injustices and abuses incurred by the weak only serve to reinforce this belief. Kaido, like all of those vying for the title of Pirate King, aims to fundamentally transform the world. Villains who wear the mask of the shadow archetype most often view themselves as the hero of their own myth. As Kaido told Yamato, life isn't a series of simple questions with simple answers. His incursion of Wano and oppression of its people is viewed by Kaido as a necessary means to achieve what he believes to be a noble end, a world restored to its natural order where survival of the fittest rightly holds sway. From Kaido's point of view, the weak, like the celestial dragons, will no longer be able to unnaturally oppress the strong in his animal kingdom, as he says he believes this world of war would represent true equality. where Big Mom overemphasizes the appearance of harmony at the expense of free will, Kaido overemphasizes strength at the expense of harmony or cooperation. We don't yet know exactly what Blackbeard hopes to accomplish, but at Marineford he declared the start of his era, indicating he too wishes to change the world by becoming Pirate King, and he proclaimed his territory on Pirate Island to be a pirate's paradise where his subjects can live freely, perhaps too freely. If Blackbeard's errant goals are also in part a dark reflection of Joy Boy's ambition to create a nation of pirates, then perhaps the trait he overemphasizes is unfettered freedom, most directly challenging Luffy's root desire to live as the person with the most freedom. Inheriting Xebec's will, Cheech's brand of piracy permits freedom to lie, cheat, murder, and steal, expression of personal freedom without any consideration for the unalienable rights of others. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness according to Thomas Jefferson, or life, liberty, and property according to John Locke. After all, as great as piracy might be in the world of One Piece, governments ostensibly exist for a reason, and should in theory serve to protect people's liberties. Unfortunately, as has often been the case throughout real-world history, the world government in One Piece and the oppressive regime by which it was preceded tilted toward tyranny, and thus piracy acts as a necessary counterbalancing force. But as the reigning emperors demonstrate, there is also an inherent danger in the pendulum swinging too far in the opposite direction. Teach, Big Mom, and Kaido are best described as filling the role of the shadow archetype, and thus we see in them the dark side of Luffy's ambition, the dark potential of changing the world in the way Joy Boy hoped to accomplish. Importantly, we can see that those in competition to take up Joy Boy's mantle all desire to become the Pirate King and want to change the world for what they believe to be the better. Remember, characters which occupy the shadow archetype are often the heroes of their own myth. This is why it's so important Luffy confront these particular villains in his approach to Laugh Tale. He must recognize the potential for both good and evil which are inherent to his quest. Taking up Roger and Joy Boy's mantle is a heavy burden and requires balancing competing interests. Big Mom, Kaido, and Blackbeard all seek to build a nation of pirates, represented in the very title Emperor, but their underlying visions are fundamentally corrupted by their tragic flaws. Luffy has slowly grown into an emperor himself, by declaring islands as part of his territory, becoming commodore of a massive 7-division fleet, and now by liberating the land which may have once been at the heart of Joy Boy's forgotten kingdom. When he eventually discovers One Piece and rises up to challenge the world, he will need to incorporate the positive qualities of his rival pirate emperors while rejecting the bad. Kaido asks Luffy what type of world he wants to create. Luffy replies that he wants to make a world where all of his friends have enough food to eat. Fitting with Luffy's character, Oda has consistently used food as a metaphor to demonstrate Luffy's maturation and growth into the hero the world demands. Goldie Roger, Odin, Rayleigh, Whitebeard, and others with some awareness of the world's lost history understood the true weight of what it means to take up Joy Boy's mantle, and the future Pirate King is going to play a pivotal role not only in beating up the bad guys who presently rule the world, but also in guiding the world toward a new dawn. Luffy is slowly maturing into the type of leader fit to lead such a revolution against the dark oppressive force which presently controls the One Piece world. This means that Luffy's desire to make the world a place where his friends don't go hungry is central to his motivation. It's what makes him a candidate to be Joy Boy. It's what makes him fit to become the Pirate King. Which makes me wonder just how closely this desire is tied to the yet-to-be-revealed dream that Luffy and Roger share. Returning to the topic of Wano's importance, during the Void Century, Wano's borders were opened, and thus sea stone could be exported to the world. Anyone who wanted to join this free nation could enter the Grand Line from anywhere on the sea as long as they possessed sea stone, representing harmony with the ocean's power. But the calm belt, like moats around a castle, served as barriers to keep out enemies of freedom. There are traces of Joy Boy's influence throughout the Grand Line because he tried to unite all those around the world in this endeavor. The proud Jolly Roger was flown by all who shared Joy Boy's vision, and Wano sat at the heart of this seafaring society. Joy Boy's kingdom was a pirate's paradise, a network of independent nations united in pursuit of freedom, working toward a certain end goal which was never achieved, to bring a new dawn to the entire world. We see this vision reflected in the very nomenclature of the Grand Line. The first half is called Paradise, a remnant of this pirate's paradise which once thrived, and the second half is called the New World because that's exactly what Joy Boy was trying to forge. Now, as great as this all might sound, the world was still imperfect in Joy Boy's era. The Grand Line was still parsed in two by the Red Line, a symbol of the world's oppression, and Joy Boy was unable to fulfill the promise he made to Shirahoshi's Poseidon predecessor. Though they made preparations, he was never able to bring her people to live under the light of the true sun. Zunisha committed an unnamed crime and was forced to begin its 8th century march. Wano's borders were forced closed, the city of Shandora was destroyed, and Joy Boy's crew disbanded, never to meet again. Though I first encountered the tale of Libertalia a long time ago, I was resistant to the idea that Joy Boy led a nation of pirates because it implied the 20 kings were unjust aggressors who banded together in an effort to stamp out a free nation of pirates and then blotted out history afterward to mask this heinous act. But this never quite matched with the nuanced way Oda writes conflict and structures his world. I was bothered by the fact that the Forgotten Kingdom, drawing inspiration from Libertalia, would present piracy as the paramount virtue. And while Luffy, Roger, and Joy Boy are presented as virtuous, they don't represent all pirates in the world. Piracy itself is morally neutral. These Straw Hats represent the good that piracy can accomplish in the One Piece world, but we have also seen the bad. Thus, one key detail has shifted my perspective on this matter, and it's in recognizing the potential reason Joy Boy's vision, this Forgotten Kingdom, was never realized. So why did this utopian vision fail? How did this all fall apart? While I have extolled the virtues of freedom and piracy as a means of combating oppression in a world dominated by tyrannical forces, it's important to note that Oda has taken a measured, nuanced approach to this subject. Oda created a morally complex world from the very outset of the voyage. He doesn't paint with a broad brush in generalizing the actions of any one group. Within the first 3 chapters, we were introduced to Luffy and Kobe, both framed as morally upstanding characters. Luffy's dream is to become the Pirate King, and Kobe's dream is to become a Marine Admiral, an enemy of the Pirate King. Although Luffy's pirate mentor Shanks was shown to be a good man in the first chapter, willing to sacrifice life and limb for Luffy's well-being, the second chapter introduced us to Alvida, a brutal tyrant who also flies the Jolly Roger. In Shelltown, we were introduced to Helmeppo and Morgan, corrupt Marines who abused their positions of authority, but also saw there were more nobly minded subordinates ready to assume leadership upon their downfall. Antagonists in the East Blue alternated between pirate captains and Marines. Oda made it clear right from the outset that the line dividing good and evil does not evenly parse between pirate and Marine.
I've known good criminals and bad cops, bad priests, honorable thieves. You can be on one side of the law or the other.
If this is true in the modern era, it was also true in the time Joy Boy sailed the seas and flew the Jolly Roger. We know that Vivi's ancestor ranked among the 20 kings who banded together to oppose the Forgotten Kingdom. Yet Vivi is an inactive member of the Straw Hat Pirates, and although the moral character of someone's ancestor, particularly one who lived 8 centuries earlier, isn't necessarily a strong indicator of the values a person will carry, everything we have been told thus far suggests the Nefeltari family were historically righteous and just monarchs who cared deeply about their people, and based on the way this revelation was presented, I believe we can intuit that the Nefeltari monarch who joined the alliance of 20 kings wasn't an evil man. Importantly, we know the Alabasta monarch appears to have had a change of heart, as he chose not to ascend with the other 19 kings and their families to reside in Marijois, and based on the fact that Alabasta now protects a poneglyph and hides the ancient weapon Pluton, we can intuit they became allied with Joy Boy before the conclusion of the Void Century War. Despite the fact that Alabasta remains a member nation of the world government, they help to protect Joy Boy's legacy and will. The 5 elders even referred to Vivi's ancestor as a traitor because they broke from the other 19 kings. From this information, we can infer there was just cause, or at least there appeared to be some just cause, in initially opposing this Forgotten Kingdom. Vivi's ancestor thought it was justifiable to join the Alliance of Kings, but also decided it was wrong to ascend to live among the other 19 families and to form the world government after the conclusion of the Void Century War. Imu manipulated the 20 kings and used them to achieve his own goals. Accordingly, the 20 kings likely did not band together with evil intent, yet based on what I've presented thus far, it would seem that the act of destroying Joy Boy's kingdom of pirates places them on the wrong side of history. And while I do believe that's the case, we need to ask why these people from around the world saw Joy Boy's kingdom as a threat. I believe there are 2 factors at play here. The first is the fact that the ancient weapons Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus were in existence during this time period. It would seem, based on the fact that the poneglyphs point the way toward the weapons' location, that they were hidden away by Joy Boy and his allies. Rayleigh told Neptune that in seeking the poneglyphs, the Roger pirates weren't pursuing the weapons themselves, but those who called them weapons. This tells us that those who hid the weapons away and recorded the poneglyphs were one and the same. We can thus surmise that these weapons were once wielded by the Forgotten Kingdom, but for what purpose? Perhaps the answer rests in the nature of the weapons themselves. Based on our limited information, we know that the weapons possessed immense destructive power. Poseidon and Uranus are named after the gods of the sea and sky respectively from Greek mythology, while Pluton is named after Pluto, god of the underworld from Roman mythology. Remember, earlier I suggested that the powers of the weapons may draw inspiration from Ryujin. Poseidon, the ability to command the Sea Kings, resembles Ryujin's ability to communicate with sea creatures. Pluton is a massive warship, which by its very nature relies on the power of the seas. Uranus is a mystery which I'll discuss more in a moment, but as noted earlier, in myth, Ryujin possesses jewels which allow him to control the tides and weather.
The moon accepts your ridiculous proposal.
I believe we're now beginning to get a clear picture of what these so-called weapons actually are. The fact that one was intentionally constructed while the other is a natural born power implies that the weapons don't arise from a singular source. They aren't all supernatural powers or mechanical monstrosities. The three weapons don't arise from a singular origin point, but were assembled by the Forgotten Kingdom to work in tandem and accomplish a singular goal, to transform the world and bring a new dawn in accordance with Joy Boy's vision. As further evidence, Big Mom and Kaido declared their intent to seek out the ancient weapons before becoming Pirate King, and given our earlier conversation about the Emperors rivaling Luffy to succeed Joy Boy serving as a dark mirror for the first Pirate King, it's all the more fitting both Big Mom and Kaido believe these weapons will help them transform the world into their ideal projected futures. Joy Boy's kingdom was a seafaring network of people and island nations unified under the Jolly Roger in their pursuit of freedom. Poseidon commands the massive army of Sea Kings which shield the Grand Line from outside invasion, and Pluton is a massive warship which rides on the waves. We can thus see that these weapons work in tandem to confer particular advantage to a seafaring society. Roger understood that at least one critical piece wasn't in place when he rediscovered One Piece, and made his plans accordingly. He was a dying man who didn't have the time to wait for Shirahoshi's power to awaken, and thus decided he was too early. This tells us that the power of Poseidon, and by extension the other two weapons, are critical in bringing the new dawn and fulfilling Joy Boy's will. Uranus derives its name from the god of the sky in Greek mythology, suggesting this weapon represents a sky-based power which somehow works in conjunction with the other two weapons. I believe Uranus likely somehow harnesses the power of the moon to control the tides, and thus may be connected to Elbaf. In Greek mythology, the blood of Uranus was used to create the giants, which gives us a basis for a connection between Elbaf and Uranus in One Piece. There is further evidence to suggest these sky people and the moon are connected to the giants of Elbaf as well. Eneru originates from a sky island called Birka, and later discovered a technologically advanced city on the moon, which goes by the same name. Birka takes its name from a real-world Norse trading port, and the giants in One Piece are patterned on Vikings. The monarchy on Elbaf even seemingly derived their names from the Norse pantheon. While the weapons may explain in part why the 20 Kings viewed the Forgotten Kingdom as a threat, I think they were originally assembled for the purpose of helping bring about global change in accordance with Joy Boy's vision, and this is reflected in the very nature of the weapons themselves. While Pluton was built, Poseidon is born, which calls into question the very fact that these powerful forces were called weapons. Poseidon isn't an object to be possessed, and we know that power is meant to help someday guide the fishermen on the road toward the sun. As Neptune said in chapter 967, every power depends on how you use it. In fact, this very theme was introduced in the Water 7 story arc, and it's no small coincidence shipbuilding served as the metaphor. In his youth, Frankie often constructed battleships with no ill intent, but he failed to heed Iceberg's frequent warnings, and recklessly left his unfinished weapons in an accessible location. Cypherpole turned Frankie's weapons on themselves to frame Tom's workers, thereby preventing Tom from being acquitted despite the goodwill he engendered by completing the Sea Train project. Frankie learned his lesson the hard way, but we here see some pretty interesting parallels emerge. Tom was likely descended from the clan of fishmen who originally built Pluton and Noah. The Sea Kings entrusted Noah's repair to Tom's brother Den, and said they must again rely on the help of that clan, implying Tom's ancestors were the ones who built these very important ships in the distant past. I would go so far as to suggest that Tom's ancestor was to Joy Boy as Frankie is to Luffy. Pluton may not have been just any warship, but Joy Boy's personal Thousand Sunny. After all, Frankie has loaded the Straw Hats ship full of weapons, which could lead some to consider it an instrument of war. This is purely speculation, but I could imagine the Void Century shipwright who accompanied Joy Boy did the same on a much larger scale, and perhaps inspired the arsenal Frankie selected for the Thousand Sunny. All this lends to the idea that the weapons originally were assembled to accomplish a noble goal, but were misused such that their purpose is now widely misunderstood. The government is indeed fearful that they could be revived, but the motivation for this concern is rooted in the fact that the weapons were intended to upend the present structure of the world. So if this is the case, then how and why were the weapons misused? Why did the 20 Kings become fearful of their very existence? These questions are what lead us into our second point of discussion regarding the downfall of the Forgotten Kingdom. I asserted that what Joy Boy was trying to build was a kingdom of pirates, and there's a reason Libertalia is nothing more than a utopian myth. A nation of pirates sounds great on paper, but in practice, it would be incredibly difficult to realize. How would a kingdom of piracy actually function? Particularly when not all pirates are as benevolent as the Straw Hats. In One Piece, piracy is a vehicle to pursue freedom, but how much freedom is too much? Where do you draw the line? What happens when one person exercising their individual liberty infringes on the rights of others? Who arbitrates these disputes? These are rhetorical questions without simple answers. As George R.R. Martin said, it was easy to write on paper at the end of The Lord of the Rings that Aragorn ruled wisely and well, but what was his specific taxation policy? These Song of Ice and Fire novels arose from his desire to explore the actual challenges in attempting to rule a kingdom wisely and well. My point is that Luffy wants to become the Pirate King because the one who succeeds Roger is the most free, and this same motivation likely inspired Joy Boy. But the real question is how this freedom will be used, to do good or to do evil. It's important here to understand that these questions are at the heart of the central theme of One Piece.
I don't even know what the theme is. What's the theme?
According to John York, from his book Into the Woods, a 5-act journey into story, a theory is posited, an argument explored, and a conclusion reached. That, in a nutshell, is what theme is. Subject matter is a static given. Theme, on the other hand, is an active exploration of an idea. It's a premise to be explored. It's a question. Gold Roger's dying words have innervated the entire society of the story world such that sailing the Jolly Roger and searching for lost treasure have become commonplace. Luffy competes with both those who share and clash with his moral outlook. The struggle between two brands of piracy is thus representative of different perspectives on how this freedom should be expressed. Theme is a question, and Oda asks readers to consider whether or not freedom should be upheld as the paramount virtue. In considering the fundamental struggle between freedom and oppression, piracy versus global supergovernance, we must ask, is freedom good? What limitations should be placed on freedom, and how should it be utilized? These are questions people have grappled with for centuries. For example, Thomas Jefferson asserted in the opening line of the American Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The particular rights listed were borrowed from English philosopher John Locke, who believed man's natural rights include life, liberty, and property. Of course, these words represent an ideal which hasn't always been achieved, and these freedoms historically haven't equally been extended to all. But that's where it's important to distinguish between these philosophies in principle and in practice. It's much easier to put words on paper than it is to bring them to life. We're here discussing why Joy Boy's aspirations failed to materialize. The principles on which his nation were founded may have been pure, which means the breakdown may have been in execution. After all, utopian visions sound great and represent our highest ideals, but fail to account for the inherent corruptibility of human nature. The degree to which different societies value freedom varies.
The point of this country is if you want to eat garbage, balloon up to 600 pounds, and die of a heart attack at 43, you can. You are free to do so. To me, that's beautiful.
Where the United States often prioritizes rugged individualism.
Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Don't teach a man to fish and you feed yourself. He's a grown man. Fishing's not that hard.
Japan is, generally speaking, more focused on the collective good and prioritizes harmony. There are, of course, historical underpinnings for these varying perspectives, and as should be evident, philosophy put into practice means negotiating the often competing interests of many stakeholders. And in the case of a society, every individual member of said society has an interest in how it's structured and which values are prioritized.
So, what I hear when I'm being yelled at is people caring loudly at me.
Some people will use freedom to do evil. Others will willingly sacrifice freedom or autonomy for safety.
We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game.
Others still say these safest hands are still our own.
We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
My broader point is that a nuanced approach to theme means offering counter perspectives. In the One Piece world, an oppressive force dominates, and piracy symbolically represents opposition. But Oda explores this theme fully by examining whether or not piracy is the answer. Would the world truly be better off if it were liberated by toppling the Celestial Dragon regime? And the answer is more complicated than you might think, because it depends on what replaces tyranny. There is an inherent danger in an excess of freedom or anarchy, which some who harbor ill intent would capitalize on for personal gain, and others still use this fear to justify their own tyranny. And here we return to the idea that there are two brands of pirates in the One Piece world. Oda considered formalizing this distinction in the pilot version of Romance Dawn, with good-hearted adventurers like Luffy referred to as Peacemains, while self-serving cutthroats were termed Morganeers. This name is a reference to infamous Welsh privateer Henry Morgan. Oda instead elected the simpler and more elegant approach of allowing readers to intuit a character's morality based upon their actions. Oda consistently eschews defining a character's moral alignment through such strict nomenclature. There are plenty of good Marines and bad pirates, despite the fact that the world government represents oppression and that piracy is meant to serve a noble goal. This struggle also existed in the time Roger voyaged through the Grand Line as he joined forces with Garp to stop Rock's Dizabek on God Valley. The Rock's pirates were notorious for their brutality and their infighting. They pillaged and plundered to their dark heart's content, and their influence was far-reaching. The destruction of Boodle's village 40 years ago coincides with the reign of Rocks, suggesting this infamous supergroup may have even spread into the East Blue, the tamest of the world's seas. We can thus extrapolate to say this same struggle between two distinct brands of piracy existed during Joy Boy's era. While Joy Boy may have been the world's first pirate king, and like Roger and Luffy, used the freedom his position bestowed to protect others and grant them the same independence from tyranny, there were certainly those in his era who sailed the Jolly Roger with ill intent. If Joy Boy was the prototype of Luffy and Roger, then perhaps there was a pirate in the same mold as Zebek and Blackbeard who contested Joy Boy's reign as the pirate king. We know Vanderdecken's ancestor, the original captain of the Flying Dutchman, tried to take possession of the primordial Poseidon during this same time period, which is all the more notable when we consider the importance of this power in realizing Joy Boy's dream. Based on Davy Jones, the legendary sea devil himself, Foxy said that long ago the Davy Back fight was invented on the pirate island Full of Lead, the very same location where the Rocks pirates formed and which Blackbeard now occupies as the center of his territory. This could indicate that pirates adhering to the Morganeer brand of piracy, unified around a particular figure, began to coalesce during the Void Century on the very same island. I even suspect that there may have been a traitor who turned against Joy Boy and intentionally subverted his vision for personal gain. There are many self-similar patterns in One Piece, and we saw this betrayal modeled by Marshall D. Teach. Whitebeard was a truly good and honorable man who, despite wielding immense power, harbored no desire for global conquest. He was content to act as father to the many wayward sons like Ace gathered aboard his ship. He freely extended that invitation to many, which, as we saw through Ace, was a powerful transformative influence in their lives. But Teach took advantage of Whitebeard's kind nature and generosity. He grew in strength while hiding in Whitebeard's shadow, and then, when he saw the opportunity, turned traitor, killed Thatch, and stole the Darkness Logia. We can thus see how an evil pirate may have emerged from Joy Boy's kingdom of pirates, or perhaps even from among his own crew. Perhaps like Rocks during Roger's era, and the Blackbeard pirates and Luffy's era, pirates intent on utilizing their newfound freedom to aggrandize self at the expense of others by pillaging, plundering, and doing more or less what's expected of pirates were unified by a dark figure like Zebek or Teach. I even wonder if Oda's original choice of nomenclature suggests the primordial Morganeer archetype was actually named after Henry Morgan. There may be even deeper significance to the Davy Back fight than has yet been revealed. According to Foxy, the coins thrown into the ocean at the start of the game are offered as tribute to the mythic sea devil Davy Jones, and are also intended to bind the soul of those who violate the game's rules. Robin told Chopper that Davy Jones was a pirate cursed by demons to reside forever on the ocean floor, collecting treasure in Davy Jones' locker. Everything lost at sea sinks down to Davy Jones. It's no small coincidence that Rocks and Blackbeard have both centered their territory around the very same island where this game honoring the legendary Sea Devil began. Perhaps Davy Jones is or was Joy Boy's primordial Morganeer adversary, who made a pact with Emu and was thus cursed by demons as Robin described. Davy Jones' tale is remarkably similar to that of Vanderdecken's ancestor, but it's worth noting that contrary to Pirates of the Caribbean lore, Davy Jones and the Flying Dutchman are two distinct legends. I even wonder if the similarity between the story of Vanderdecken I and Davy Jones is meant as a sort of diversion. Both the legend of Davy Jones and Vanderdecken I suggest they were cursed to forever reside on the ocean floor. Perhaps it's no small coincidence that while Ryugu Kingdom, occupied by the Mer people, floats in a massive bubble, the Fishman district is located on the ocean floor. While this idea is a bit out there, I wonder if the Fishmen actually originate from Davy Jones' curse, with Hody Jones as his direct descendant. In any case, it seems there may be a deep-sea evil entity at work in the One Piece world, and its power directly relates to the Morganeer brand of piracy embodied by Blackbeard and Zebek, and perhaps his evil will lives through the Darkness Logia, representing the crushing abyss below. As noted, theme is a question, and accordingly the manner in which the world's newfound freedom will be utilized is yet to be determined. Dragon even states the world is waiting for the answer to freedom, echoing the same sentiment expressed by Roger. Ultimately, Oda is going to validate the importance of pursuit of freedom, but as we discussed, the hero's journey begins by looking inward to recognize the internal potential for evil. Piracy can be a powerful force for good in a world where the institutions of power have been thoroughly corrupted. But as shown by any Morganeer who races the same Jolly Roger, unrestricted freedom can also be destabilizing and lead to a different form of tyranny. Perhaps Joy Boy was short-sighted or overly idealistic. Libertalia is, after all, a utopian myth. Maybe he failed to account for the internal corruptibility of his vision. Often failure is resultant from an inability to recognize our own flaws, as evidenced throughout fiction and mythology. From Achilles to Hercules to Anakin Skywalker, heroes who fall from grace often have one tragic flaw which goes unrecognized.
I don't like sand.
I'm not saying Joy Boy himself was corrupted, but perhaps he believed too completely in his own vision for the world and was so focused on overturning the very real global oppressive force that he failed to notice the dark potential growing within his own ranks, which emerged to shatter his vision and spark the cataclysmic war which scarred the entire world.
Well, I got a flash for you, Joy Boy. Party time is over.
Joy Boy's nation of pirates may have been centered around Wano, and symbolized the power of the sea to conduct the world toward a better and freer state. Many kingdoms and people around the world shared in this vision, and Joy Boy assembled the tools needed to effect this change, including Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, and of course, One Piece itself. But something went wrong. The 20 kings became fearful of the growing strength of Joy Boy's kingdom. This concern was in part predicated on the innate destructive power possessed by the ancient weapons. But importantly, it was more fundamentally the schism between Peacemains and Morganeers which motivated the underlying distrust of Joy Boy's pirate kingdom. Remember, I suggested that the ancient weapons were misunderstood and feared because they were misused, and so perhaps this evil group of pirates from Joy Boy's era were responsible. Maybe this was the very reason Vanderdecken I targeted Shirahoshi's predecessor. The 20 kings would then have had very good reason to band together in opposition to Joy Boy based on their fear of the ancient weapon's destructive power in the wrong hands. Rocks terrorized the world for a season, and the past 2 years have been turbulent due to Blackbeard's rise to power. So perhaps there was a similar chapter during the Void Century when a band of evil pirates rampaged, and thus the 20 kings were inspired to take action, precipitating the cataclysmic global war which ended in Joy Boy's defeat. It's unclear exactly what happened in the final stages of the war which doomed the Forgotten Kingdom, but I would here like to enter into evidence Giola's living art, widely speculated to contain cryptic references to the world's forgotten history.
It makes no damn sense. Compels me though.
Now, art is subjective and open to interpretation, but we can clearly identify certain symbols and figures which relate to the overarching conflict in the One Piece world. The semicircular frame resembles the Gates of Justice, which connect the world government's 3 great facilities. At the center is the sun, obscured by the hands of a monolithic figure featuring a swirl pattern. Perhaps it's no small coincidence Chopper, a devil fruit user himself, is at its center, considering the significance of the devil fruit's spiral pattern. We see 2 eyes, the right open and the left closed and crying, which may relate to the mystery of One Piece itself, and also alludes to the Illuminati symbol of the all-seeing eye. The left eye of Jaya is also missing, and many characters throughout the series like Dragon, Wiper, and Albert have tattoos or scars surrounding their left eyes. Oda stated in a 2007 interview that eye patches are synonymous with pirates, yet made note of the fact that thus far there isn't a single pirate in One Piece who wears an eye patch. He went on to say that he plans to draw an eye patch wearing pirate near the very end of the series, and given that most of the big players in the modern age of pirates have already been introduced, we're running low on candidates. The closed left eye could thus represent this legendary eye patch wearing pirate from the distant past, perhaps Joy Boy himself or his ancient Morganeer adversary. Momo's face is superimposed on a crowned figure kneeling at the bottom of the composition. The shape of the crown resembles the one worn by Lord Emu, and the particular way his body is positioned is reminiscent of Oda's sketch of a young Blackbeard. We know Momo is particularly important to future events, so perhaps it's significant his face is the one attached to this particular figure. The location of this crowned entity at the bottom, beneath some sort of schism, could also allude to its emergence from some sort of underworld. On the left side, we see wings resembling those belonging to the Sky People, perhaps signifying the importance of the Lunarians. Brook remains outside the painting itself, perhaps representing the one who composed the song Binksaki, which tells of events from the Void Century. Nami's face is placed on top of another large figure, seemingly attached to strings. It's unclear what this could mean, but I suspect Nami has a bigger part to play in the endgame events than has yet been revealed. While this doesn't tell us much specifically, Giola's artwork indicates this war was complicated and numerous parties were involved. It's also possible we haven't yet identified all of the key figures from the Void Century, in particular the Moon Princess from Oden and Hayori's favorite song. I even wonder if Amatsuki Toki, whose name means Heavenly Moon, could be this Moon Princess. Luffy and the Straw Hats have certainly saved their fair share of princesses over the course of their adventures, so it's not at all unreasonable to assume the first Pirate King Joy Boy may have done the same. Indeed, the Void Century War appears to have engulfed the entire world, or at least the entire Grand Line, which resulted in Shandura's destruction very near the end of the Void Century. Zunisha apparently committed a great crime for which it was punished and compelled to embark on an 8-century-long odyssey, leading it eventually back to Wano. Wano's borders were closed to the world, cutting off the supply of sea stone until the day of Joy Boy's return. The 20 kings banded together to stand in Joy Boy's way, and a faction of evil pirates emerged. But who whispered in the ear of the world's monarchs? What evil force told them that this push toward freedom must be stopped at all costs? We must remember the distinct and consistent patterns in Oda's writing. The true villain typically stands in the shadows and secretly stokes the flames of a burgeoning conflict. We saw Frankie's ships misused to frame Tom before his trial, and Spandam, the one who orchestrated the plot, was the very person waiting to point the finger at Water 7's famous shipwright. As they say, the devil is a great accuser, and accordingly the dark figure and source of evil in the One Piece world is crafty and manipulative. In keeping with the established pattern of villains who manipulate both sides of a conflict to achieve their own dark ends, he accused Joy Boy's kingdom based on false or fabricated evidence, and bent the 20 kings to his will. Perhaps the same devil poisoned the mind of someone in Joy Boy's inner circle and betrayed their captain's vision, and thus spurred the 20 kings to action. I hope you guessed his name, because Lord Emu is the embodiment of this evil force and the one pulling the strings, as close as you'll find to the devil incarnate in the One Piece world. I'm not invoking this imagery arbitrarily. Oda has consistently used Judeo-Christian iconography and terminology to describe the nature of this overarching conflict, and the central evil, not a shade of the hero like Blackbeard, Kaido, and Big Mom, but a representation of the cosmic source of evil, is the father of lies. He is the one who manipulates. He pits people against one another. He creates problems and then pretends to offer the solution. He sells himself as an ally and offers power, all the while planning to lay their souls to waste when their usefulness expires. He cares about no one but himself. As we saw in the Chamber of Flowers, this being has a slight frame and appears to be serene, even benevolent. He stands in a bright sunlit room full of flowers, and gently reaches out for a butterfly to allow it to perch on his finger, while at his feet lies a sword, and slashed images of Luffy, Blackbeard, and Shirahoshi, revealing the true violent and resentful nature of the world's secret ruler, which lies beneath his placid exterior. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he doesn't exist. Well, the devil in the One Piece world does exist, and the world remains unaware of this secret. But even worse, he has convinced the world that his enemies, the ones who stand against him, are their enemies.
You don't take over the world with gaudy displays of violence. Real control is surgical, invisible. It interferes only when necessary.
Despite the formation of the Grand Line by the Sea Dragon, which provided the world the tools needed to fight for freedom, Emu's machinations did not cease, and he soon found in the 20 kings new apprentices far younger and more powerful. In the decades between Roger's execution and the arrival of the worst generation, the unchallenged four emperors had been locked in an intractable stalemate, and resultantly grew into complacent, idle tyrants, whose tragic flaws invalidated them as potential successors to Joy Boy. But the time is now right for the next pirate king to enter the scene, shoulder the burden of history, and rise up to challenge the world. Luffy and Law already irreversibly broke the gears of power when they set their plan to topple Kaido in motion on Punk Hazard. Luffy's battles with Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard represent confronting the Morganeer brand of piracy, which may have been responsible for Joy Boy's downfall, and as such, it's important he recognizes and understands the dark side of his ambition before inheriting the heavy responsibility waiting for him on Laugh Tale. In the final verses of Banksaki, the upbeat melody is juxtaposed by the melancholy tale of friends forever parted. The sun set on Joy Boy's era, but he and his crew placed their faith in the inevitable arrival of a new dawn. Based on the inherent similarities between Luffy and Roger, I imagine Joy Boy was a person much in the same mold who embodied many of the same characteristics. Luffy was strongly averse to being directly tied down by a massive fleet, but eventually agreed to a mutually beneficial relationship wherein they could call on each other for help when needed. Importantly, however, the Straw Hats remain set apart as Luffy's inner circle, a core group of friends who travel together in pursuit of impossible dreams. Though the first Pirate King led a global coalition, I believe Joy Boy traveled with a core group of friends. He, of course, had connections and bonds with people throughout the Grand Line, and the relationship mirrored those the Straw Hats share with the nations they have protected throughout their voyage. When Joy Boy and his friends parted, knowing their time of adventure was at its end, they took the name D, which looks like a smile, for the half moon hidden behind the clouds, as a symbol to forever memorialize their friendship. Joy Boy's crew were much like the Roger Pirates and the Straw Hat Pirates, and those who carry the name D in the present are their descendants. The D's were gathered from around the world, explaining how a giant like Saul could also carry this name. Among Joy Boy's crew there was a monkey, a Trafalgar, a gull, a Portgas. I even wonder if there were 9 of them in total, based on Toki's prophecy of 9 shadows cast by the moon, someday bringing a new dawn. After all, the new dawn seems to have a double meaning for both Wano and the wider One Piece world. If I'm on the right track, this begs the question of which other characters could in fact be bearers of the Will of D. Of course, it's possible there are others yet to be introduced, but Law set the precedent for some D's to keep their name hidden, and his other secret middle name Wooder also remains a mystery. Eustace Kid could be an interesting candidate, given that he, Luffy, and Law represent a sort of trio. Robin has also taken particular interest in the mystery of the D's, and as I've suggested, it would seem the Kozuki possess all the requisite character traits. I even wonder if they could be descended from Joy Boy himself. If my speculation is correct, that the straw hat kept in Imu's vault is a memento of Joy Boy, his seemingly vanquished foe, it's worth noting that based on the pattern on the walls in chapter 906, it seems there are 9 alcoves, perhaps each containing a talisman of some kind belonging to each member of Joy Boy's crew. Given that Odin, like Roger and Ace, smiled just before his death, I believe the Kozuki were also a core part of this group, and in that sense, I think there were likely analogues to many members of the Straw Hat Pirates aboard Joy Boy's ship. Joy Boy himself was the captain. Tom's ancestor who built Pluton was the shipwright. Their musician composed the song Banksaki, which Brook introduced to readers 8 centuries later. The memory of their adventures, forgotten to the world, became nothing more than a legend, or a story.
You said memories become stories when we forget them. Maybe some of them become songs.
That would be nice.
The end of Joy Boy's age coincided with the setting of the sun in the song Banksaki, yet his companions took heart knowing the moon would rise to guide adventurers through the approaching night. We see this very sentiment expressed in the stories and legends told by Joy Boy's closest allies all around the world, who together wait for this prophesied new dawn. Noah was unable to carry the people of Rigu Kingdom to the surface, but as the Sea King said, surely all will go well next time, and the fishmen hope to someday walk the path toward the sun. The clans of Wano, aside from the cursed Kurozumi clan, all have names which contain the word moon. In particular, the Kozuki, whose name means light moon, were responsible for creating the poneglyphs. Sulong, the true form of the road poneglyph protecting minks, is only revealed under the light of the full moon. The ancient Shandorans once worshipped a solar deity, perhaps alluding to the mythic folk hero sun god Nika, and based on the lunar city Birka, they seem to have some direct connection to the moon. The winter solstice is celebrated on Elbaf to mark the death and rebirth of the sun, and indeed the sun died, or more accurately, faded from view at the end of Joy Boy's era. The world is thus now in a state of night, but the moon reflects the sun's light and thus symbolizes hope. As Pedro told Perospero, he named his crew Nox, meaning night, in recognition of the fact that there is no night which doesn't end in sunrise. Placing faith in a future sunrise also means accepting that the setting of the sun cannot be prevented. This willing embrace and acceptance of death in service of a higher ideal or purpose is reflective of the story's underlying mythic structure, and is also a recurrent motif seen in both those who carry the name D, who smiled just before death, and in the grinning skull, the Jolly Roger, which serves as the flag of piracy. No symbol could better represent what piracy means to the world of One Piece, and the attitudes of those like Luffy, Roger, and Joy Boy. We may then liken Joy Boy's era to the dissolution phase of the cosmogonic cycle. Whatever world preceded the Void Century dissolved from a waking state. The sun set on Joy Boy and his crew, and the world is now asleep. Those who pursue freedom like the Straw Hat Pirates are guided through the night by the moon, a reflection of the sun's light and impossible dreams. One day soon the world will again wake. The nightmarish incarnation of the shadow that is the world government and the devil which resides in secret on its throne will be abolished, and the world will witness a new dawn. As Campbell said, when our day has come for the victory of death, death closes in. There is nothing we can do except be crucified and resurrected, dismembered totally, and then reborn. Or as the song Banksaki says, doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. But fear not, for the moon will rise, to guide the way in the night, and the sun will eventually return. Roger and Joy Boy both willingly accepted their fates. Roger realized he was too early and went to the execution platform smiling, knowing his successor would someday surpass him and complete that which he could not, and Joy Boy apparently did the same. He knew his era was coming to a close and recognized that history would be erased. He and his friends thus devised a system to preserve and protect the truth, trusting in the accuracy of these prophecies that someday someone will inherit their will. He even left a direct apology letter to the Mermaid Princess, indicating there was a period of time in which they realized their downfall was imminent, during which they could make provisions for the future. Joy-Boy's kingdom of pirates was spread out across the Grand Line, and thus the poneglyphs were entrusted to many nations spanning both halves of this legendary Sea of Dreams, like Alabasta, Shandora, Fishman Island, and Zo. The ancient weapons, which must someday be regathered to complete Joy-Boy's vision, were also hidden away. It's here worth noting that both the poneglyphs and the legendary treasure One Piece seem to be based on the tale of a real-world French pirate named Olivier Levasseur, who famously tossed a cryptogram from his execution scaffold and dared the world to decipher his final message in order to locate his treasure. Ultimately, no one was ever able to successfully locate Levasseur's treasure, but it seems Oda took inspiration from this tale. Like Levasseur, Goldie Roger, said to have attained everything this world has to offer, including wealth, fame, and fortune, dared the world to seek out his treasure named One Piece by the newspapers, and in so doing, initiated the current great age of piracy. Roger spoke his final words aloud to the crowd in Logtown, but because of the Void Century, Joy-Boy was forced to engrave his last message in stone. The cryptogram portion of the story seems to have directly inspired the poneglyphs, and thus it would make sense if this language was created by the forgotten first pirate king, as well as his allies. In the 8 centuries following the end of Joy-Boy's era, the road poneglyphs have had a clear purpose in preserving the true history and in protecting One Piece. The ability to read this language was passed down among the Kozuki clan for centuries, thus necessitating their assistance for anyone who seeks to learn the history of the world and reach the final island. If Joy-Boy himself created this language, it certainly seems possible he was himself a member of the Kozuki clan, though this is far from definitive. The 30 indestructible poneglyphs dispersed throughout the Grand Line appear to have been forged through some special process, as they are said to exude a strange energy. This could be indicative of some type of residual haki or willpower imbued into the stones. Interestingly, the ruins of Shandora are the only place we saw the poneglyphs used as the common language. These writings are seemingly distinct from the cube-shaped poneglyphs in that they were carved into ordinary stone walls. It's possible the poneglyphs, like Levasseur's cryptogram, were devised by Joy-Boy as his era came to a close in order to preserve his final message. I suppose it's also possible this language, like One Piece itself, is much older, that the indestructible tablets are what's special, and that the language itself was once commonly used throughout Joy-Boy's kingdom as a sort of lingua franca, or a trade language used to unite people belonging to different societies from around the world. In any case, an important question which remains unanswered is how Laugh Tale was originally mapped by those who created the poneglyphs. Roger told Whitebeard and Odin that when he and his crew arrived on Lodestar Island, the needle on their log pose went haywire and refused to point toward a new location. This erratic behavior revealed that there was one more island waiting on the horizon. According to Inu Arushi, it was on Lodestar that Roger somehow learned about the importance of the road poneglyphs and the civilization by which they were created. Importantly, in order for Laugh Tale to be mapped, its location must have already been known to those who created the road poneglyphs. There are many possibilities here. Did the hand of fate guide them all the way to Laugh Tale? Was instinct their only compass? Or did the Grand Line's creator somehow provide directions to the end of the line before the poneglyphs pointed the way? After all, as detailed earlier, based on Bink's Saki, it seems Joy-Boy was also sailing toward the end of the sea during the Void Century, which potentially precedes the road poneglyphs. Or was Lodestar once the end of the sea? Did Joy-Boy and his allies somehow create an even more secret final island to hide One Piece before the end of their age? This could explain why Lodestar, which is itself incredibly difficult to reach, seems to be the natural endpoint of the Grand Line. It may also explain the erratic behavior of the log pose if Laugh Tale is in a location it wasn't meant to be, disturbing the natural electromagnetic signature of the region. Or maybe it was made from multiple islands, each with distinct magnetic signatures, confusing the log pose and preventing it from locking on to a new location. Another key event I sort of glossed over is Zunisha's Great Crime. We know it was once allied to Joy-Boy during the Void Century, and accordingly both the Minks and Kozuki were likely members of Joy-Boy's great nation. In an earlier video, I explained why I believe Otama's Kibi-Kibi fruit may have been used to compel Zunisha's walk and to bind it to Momo's command as a penance. Visually, Zunisha's design takes inspiration from a 1948 painting by Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali, but its name and the land atop its back seem to be rooted in the world elephant concept from Hindu cosmology. The 4 or 8 world elephants are said to stand on the back of an even larger world turtle, which makes me wonder whether the fact that Zunisha walks the seas alone could be related to its great betrayal. It also makes me wonder if the missing world turtle is somehow related to Laugh Tale. I also mentioned a potential traitor among the D's, and perhaps this is where Blackbeard and Zebek enter the picture. There's something strange about Blackbeard's body, and he's the only person who can consume more than one devil fruit, which, as we discussed, may originate with Emu. Moreover, according to Buggy, he seems to be cursed with the inability to sleep, which has some pretty significant implications given the thematic importance of dreams.
Haven't slept for a solid 83 hours, but yeah, I'm good.
Xebec's attack on God Valley indicates some greater awareness of the world's history without having read the poneglyphs, and Teach is said to have an affinity for studying history, all of which suggests that perhaps the Judas, Brutus, or Benedict Arnold among Joy Boy's crew was cursed like Zunisha, and it's only by reconciling this centuries-old dispute that Luffy will be able to complete Joy Boy's quest. Perhaps Teach's ability to consume more than one devil fruit is also somehow related to his curse, if in fact the devil fruit were created or stolen by Imu. Perhaps this ability represents the 30 pieces of silver Joy Boy's betrayer received for selling out his captain. Impel Down, where Luffy and Blackbeard last crossed paths, is based on the Inferno by Dante, at the bottom level of which resides history's greatest traitors, including the devil himself. Yet perhaps Blackbeard's reliance on collecting devil fruit will also be his ultimate undoing, if consuming more than one fruit doubles the sea's curse. This is purely speculation, but we saw in Impel Down that Teach had a full row of teeth. This could very easily be an error, but Oda usually corrects such mistakes in the published Tankobon volumes. The fact that this was never altered suggests that it may have been deliberate, but there's no telling what this could mean. Teeth in dreams are often associated with death, so perhaps this is somehow related to Teach's curse. I speculated earlier that Blackbeard could somehow be carrying Xebec or even the primordial Morganeer who betrayed Joy Boy inside him as an alter ego, Professor Quirrell style, but there's no real evidence for this at this point, so I would say it's far more likely the will of this original traitor was simply passed down to Xebec and then to Blackbeard. The approaching war for supremacy will decide which type of pirate will become Pirate King. Luffy must reconcile the 8th century old conflict which resulted in Joy Boy's demise before he can complete the even greater task of challenging the world's darkness. Kaido and Big Mom's fall is most directly representative of the power structure in the New World collapsing, the fall of the old and brittle, and the creation of a new way forward. But the worst generation aren't rising to replace them as idle rulers. As Oda said, after Wano, he's going to draw the greatest war in One Piece world history. Oden said in his letter to Toki that the worst generation will play a pivotal role in this battle, which will be great enough to split the season too, and I suspect there's no hyperbole in this statement.
You're gonna see some serious
Whitebeard also warned of a great war that will arrive when the treasure is at last discovered. The old order is already crumbling. The times they are a-changin'. The Emperor's reign and authority is no longer uncontested. They were stagnant and complacent for decades, but their dark reflections of Joy Boy's pirate kingdom are soon going to be replaced by the genuine article. Any others still vying for Roger and Joy Boy's mantle will soon clash in an epic throne war to decide who gets to inherit One Piece. As I discussed earlier, theme is a question which must be robustly tested. Roger and Joy Boy trusted destiny and dreams to guide the right successor to inherit One Piece at the right time, and this coming battle will decide whether their faith in these immutable forces will be rewarded. Perhaps as the storm of war approaches, Blackbeard will gather an alliance of evil pirates to challenge the Strides for the right to inherit One Piece, and decide which type of pirate, Peacemain or Morganeer, will be crowned Pirate King. Yet the last and often most difficult leg of the hero's journey is the return, which entails taking the treasure, the special knowledge and power gained through the voyage into the unknown, and using it for the betterment or restoration of the broader story world. In a sense, you could say that when the treasure is discovered, the story of One Piece ends. And the story of Romance Dawn begins. Luffy's fun adventure in pursuit of lost treasure will have concluded, but before he and his crew can accomplish their dreams, they will first need to shoulder the burden of history and confront the world's darkness.
I am to misbehave.
In the modern era, all memory of Joy Boy and his kingdom was erased, and the world is now waiting for his successor to finish what he started, which is no easy task. In the 800 years following the Void Century, the world has been governed by a lie. The world government is meant to provide stability, to protect, and its military might is meant to serve justice. But in truth, the 5 elders bow in secret to Lord Imu. I believe the 5 elders are the last of the 20 kings, evidenced by their battle scars, remnants of the global war of the Void Century. Their attitude and objectives indicate a more nuanced understanding of the world and the overarching conflict than the other celestial dragons. Though they coldly wield absolute authority, unlike those like St. Charlos, they don't revel in their own divinity or in purposely worsening the lives of those they oppress. They even lamented Jinbei's departure from the Seven Warlords because it signified a setback for human-fishman relations. I think this further speaks to the fact that the 20 Kings didn't band together with evil intent. Their geopolitical maneuvering seems to be focused not on eradicating piracy or expanding their own power, but in maintaining balance. Even their proposed Great Cleansing seems to be intended on restoring the status quo, all of which suggests that perhaps fearing Lord Emu, entrapped by their now 8 centuries old bargain, they are working to maintain balance in order to appease their evil overlord, hoping to avert an even worse catastrophe. Essentially, they may have sold their souls long ago, but should not be confused with the true devil they secretly serve. They don't want to do evil, but think they are doing good. They believe their compromise somehow protects the world. They're making a sort of Hobson's choice, a choice of taking what is available or nothing at all. Or in other words, oppression or complete eradication. On that note, it stands to reason there are yet untapped reserves of power at the world government's disposal. I compared Emu to other outsider villains like Crocodile, Eneru, Kaido, and Doflamingo. Notably, though they manipulated both sides of conflicts for personal gain, they also brought with them their own crews or their own elite inner circle of warriors. Baroque Works, the Four Priests, the Beast Pirates, and the Don Quixote family respectively. So if Emu is the devil of the One Piece world, what cabal of demons is waiting in the wings? Even though Roger could rely on such powerful allies as Odin, Rayleigh, and Whitebeard, he decided he wasn't the one suited to challenge the world's highest authority. Similarly, Dragon and the Revolutionaries didn't attempt to invade Marie-Joie even while the Marine fleet was preoccupied fighting Whitebeard during the Battle of Marineford, indicating the presence of a powerful, yet to be identified deterrent force. I believe the 5 elders are likely incredibly powerful. One of them even wields Shodai Kitetsu, which leads me to believe Zoro's true final battle to make his name known in the heavens may take place in the Holy Land against a fallen member of the Amatsuki clan. Further evidencing the idea that the 5 elders could be the last of the 20 kings, one of the giant statues near the entrance to the Holy Land seems to resemble the one who wields Shodai Kitetsu, and based on the layout of these monuments, it seems there's room for 20. Yet there's a chance Emu's most powerful servants have yet to emerge from the shadows. Another point I barely mentioned is the fact that both sides of this conflict equally share in their deep reverence for dragons. The world nobles call themselves celestial dragons, Tenryubito. Samurai Ryuma is famous for having once slayed a dragon 500 years ago, indicating they went extinct in the years following the Void Century. But at the behest of the world government, Vegapunk is working to revive them. There does seem to be some distinction between Eastern and Western style dragons. In the Western fantasy canon, dragons are typically malevolent creatures, monsters to be slain by knights, while Eastern dragons are typically seen as guardians or protectors. Momo, Kaido, and the dragon statues seen around the world seem to be based on Eastern dragons, while the fire-breathing beasts on Punk Hazard would be more at home in Westeros or Middle-earth. Ultimately, it's unclear what this distinction means. Ryugu Kingdom, the Siryu model dragon fruit, Samurai Ryuma, and the celestial dragons, or Tenryubito, all have names with the same root word for dragon, Ryu, while Luffy's father, Monkey D. Dragon, would be romanized as Doragon. So I would say there's an Eastern versus Western dragon motif being used, but the celestial dragons seem to have reverence or connection to both varieties, and as I suggested earlier, the mythic fish model Azura Dragon may have once been held as a sacred treasure by the nobles on God Valley. Importantly, the Siryu model specifically is based on the 4 symbols or 4 guardian beasts which protect the 4 cardinal directions. Maybe there's some connection to the 4 blue seas, but we haven't yet seen fruit based on the mythic white tiger, black tortoise, or vermilion bird. Like I said, Oda likes to mix and match the myths he draws on for inspiration, so it's quite possible he blended Siryu with Ryujin in designing the mythic sea dragon in One Piece. Notably, despite their apparent reverence for dragons and choice of title, the nobles don't use dragon-based heraldry. Emu's throne and the figurehead of world government ships instead feature lion heads, perhaps further tying the world's false, self-proclaimed god to Judeo-Christian iconography through the Lion of Judah. The Lion Herald has also been associated with Great Britain, history's largest empire. But I'm not saying the English monarchy has anything to do with Lord Emu, especially when we already know his real identity is Panda Man. It's interesting that the Straw Hats also have a lion figurehead on their ship. I don't know what it means, but this connection is interesting.
I definitely have more lions than any other country in the whole world right now. I have no idea what's going on, but if that ends up meaning something in this game, I'd say I'm set.
Getting back on track, whether they be dragons, a horde of demons, or an army of cyborg zombies, the point I'm trying to make is that though the Marines are the highest military authority, Emu likely has other forces at his disposal which haven't yet been revealed. Because the world's systems of power are so thoroughly corrupted, those who do good are often mischaracterized as villains, and nowhere is this more true than among these Straw Hat Pirates and their closest allies. Those who carry the name D, like Luffy, are called the enemies of the gods, because they directly challenge the authority of the devil who sits in secret on the seat of power. Joy Boy was almost certainly misunderstood in the same way during his era. The greatest trick the devil of the One Piece world ever pulled was convincing the world that he was God and that his enemies are devils. Notably, these Straw Hats have accepted being called devils as a juxtaposition to the true devils who falsely claim to be gods, and who have swayed much of the world to this persuasion. The Devil Emu is a deceiver and a manipulator, who falsely accused Joy Boy in similar fashion. He's the one who has been at work in the One Piece world behind the scenes for centuries from the time the Red Line was constructed, and the Lunarians, the fallen angels whose dark wings were singed by the flames of hell, reigned as so-called gods during the Age of Heaven. It's important to recognize the true purpose of the Void Century. However it was accomplished, the erasure of history wasn't about hiding the general awfulness of the world government. Such extreme measures aren't required to hide what's in plain sight. The government uses fairly conventional means to suppress information about things which put them in a bad light. Thus, the 100-Year Void is less about the means by which the 20 Kings rose to power, and more about erasing the existence of their adversary, the Forgotten Kingdom, the very name of which inspired the elders to order Clover's immediate execution and the Buster Call to commence on Ohara. In chapter 275, we learn that the poneglyph on Shandora reads, "Hold the truth in your heart. Keep your mouths silent. We are the ones who weave history." Importantly, Joy Boy's allies were told not to only hold the truth in their heart, but to keep their mouths silent. Later, in chapter 395, the 5 elders allowed Clover to speak, relaying his thesis about the events of the Void Century right up until the point he was about to announce the name of the Forgotten Kingdom. Then, they suddenly ordered his immediate execution before it could be spoken aloud. Similarly, Toki, who was born in the Void Century, put her hand over Odin's mouth in chapter 973 before he could say anything about the world's forgotten past. We know some elements of the truth can be spoken, but the name of the kingdom seems to be significant. Perhaps Eneru's mantra serves as a model for the world's present self-proclaimed godlord Emu. Maybe Emu's wrath would be incurred if the truth were made known. Maybe speaking the name of Joy Boy's kingdom somehow has the power to unlock the world's lost memory. After all, in chapter 261, Robin referred to the Void Century as the world's unspoken history. In any case, it's interesting to note that Doflamingo, who despite claiming to be a pirate, wholly embodies the ethos of the Celestial Dragons, said at Marineford that the winners write history and decide what is truth, that no matter who wins, justice will prevail because victory is all that matters. The D's, descended from Joy Boy and his crew, are the enemies of these so-called gods, and they challenged Doflamingo's assertion, as these losers of the Void Century War recorded the true history, believing that the long arc of history indeed bends toward justice, and that the truth will someday be revealed. Roger decided not to challenge the world because he was too early, but the hour is now growing late, and Rayleigh told the Straw Hats they may conclude differently, that the Roger pirates were mistaken not to act. This suggests there is a very real urgency in Luffy taking up the Pirate King's mantle, and as I alluded to earlier, the fact that the Sea Circle is still regarded as the dominant force suggests Emu's work is incomplete. Like Eneru, he demands tribute of gold and other resources and seems to be working actively toward achieving some incomplete goal. And perhaps he intends to destroy the world in the wake of his achieving that which he truly desires. Luffy won't be motivated to act based solely on the world government's past misdeeds, but I believe the true history reveals that Emu represents an active rather than a passive threat. Kaido, Eneru, Doflamingo, and Crocodile all aspire to achieve even greater levels of power and authority, and I suspect Emu is no different. Poor men want to be rich men want to be kings, and kings aren't satisfied until they rule everything. Mihawk said Luffy's greatest strength is his ability to form bonds of fellowship wherever he goes, and in the final war, he will need to call on all those friends he made throughout his voyage. This is partially why the voyage itself is so necessary to prepare the future Pirate King for the heavy burden they will inherit. Luffy's evolution into a true hero is a necessary precursor to the coming war, which will decide the fate of the entire world. Roger possessed this same innate strength, as did Joy Boy, who may have even made allies of some of history's greatest villains. Alber's words to Kaido indicate the Lunarians now await Joy Boy's return, and they're now hunted by the world government, which suggests that despite a potential previous alliance with the world's oppressors, like the Nefeltari of Alabasta, remnants of the Lunarians hiding somewhere in the world had a change of heart and now support Joy Boy's Kingdom of Pirates. Assuming the revelation of the treasure and the true history is suitably shocking, the ramifications will be global, as those all around the world are forced to choose whether to place their bets on Luffy, as did Fujitora and Shanks, or to trust the devil they already know. And that's even assuming they believe the truth when it's revealed.
I can only lead you to the truth, I can't make you believe it.
Plato's allegory of the cave suggests that often people will choose a comfortable or familiar lie rather than accept the terrifying truth of a world bigger than their presently held false perceptions, and that they may violently reject those who try to illuminate and liberate them from the chains which keep them bound in their world of shadows.
Men reject their prophets and slay them, but they love their martyrs and honor those whom they have slain.
So what's the difference between a martyr and a prophet?
Either way, it sounds like you end up dead.
It's unknown how these Straw Hats will make the truth known to the world, and while their allies will certainly support them, the world is a big place, and many will need convincing. After all, why should the world at large trust the word of a pirate? I imagine this will lead to a schism even among the ranks of the Marines and the world government. When One Piece is rediscovered, the entire world will be turned upside down. The true history will reveal not only what happened in the distant past, but also what's happening in the present. Lord Emu will be exposed, and the true nature of his game will at last be revealed. And I don't think it can be overstated just how large in scope the resultant war is going to be. Whitebeard said the whole world will be shaken, and Odin said the seas will be split apart. What's approaching is the war to end all wars, Ragnarok, or Armageddon, which will involve nearly every character the Straw Hats have met during their travels. Wano's borders need to be open for Joy Boy's return because the land of samurai is deeply connected to the power of the sea, which guides the world toward freedom. Perhaps with its borders opened, forces intent on liberating the world will be able to gather around this restored kingdom of pirates. The ancient weapons can be gathered, and a plan for stopping Emu can be put into action. I imagine this final war will make the battles on Wano and Marineford look small by comparison, as forces from around the world converge. It's impossible to say what shape the final battle will take, but I imagine we'll see Pirate King Luffy face off against World King Emu, while the Straw Hats and allies from around the world do battle against loyalist factions of the Marines, world government forces, HS-0, and whatever evil forces Emu commands. And finally, when the dust settles, Emu is defeated and his dark plans are foiled, the world will enter a new age, with the arrival of the New Dawn. The people of Ryugu Kingdom will at last walk the path toward the sun, as the Ark Noah carries them to their new home on the surface. But the fish and mer people won't be the only ones affected by this global restoration. It's unclear what this will mean for others like the Minks, who are also waiting for this prophecy to be fulfilled. I think perhaps the fact that Sulong is said to be their true form is restricted to the night of the full moon, and the fact that there may have once been more than one celestial object orbiting the One Piece world may be revealing. Based on the sun and moon symbolism used on Elbaf, it's likely they also have some connection to this prophesied future promised day, and the war by which it will be preceded. As I plan to discuss in an upcoming video, Loki's machinations may take inspiration from the story of Ragnarok, which I suspect the Giants will use to describe the war to liberate the One Piece world from Emu and the Celestial Dragons, the present false, self-proclaimed gods. Perhaps the Red Line will finally be dismantled as a symbol of unity, and the Grand Line will have at last fulfilled its purpose, allowing the Sea Dragon by which it was created and potentially sustained to finally rest. Nami's dream of mapping the world and Sanji's dream of seeing the All Blue may be equally tied to restoring the world to its proper state, and perhaps this new dawn means restoring not only the Earth, but the surrounding heavens. The globe in the Ohara flashback resembles a symbol seen in the Kozuki crest, Alabasta flag, and on Shandura, all ally nations of Joy Boy. A large circle is surrounded by 8 smaller circles. Is this representative of the Earth surrounded by 8 moons, Joy Boy and his 8 crew members, the 9 Ds or 9 shadows cast by the moon, an atom and its 8 valence electrons? It's impossible to say for certain, but it is strange we have seen only one moon traveling the night sky when it appears there may have been more in the past. But where could these celestial objects have gone? Are they trapped in the branches of Yggdrasil, representing some of the 9 realms in Norse cosmology, or were they destroyed and used to create the Red Line? There are, of course, a lot of different options here. We will also see the Straw Hat Pirates' individual dreams realized in the approaching final saga of this epic adventure. Once the history is revealed, I believe it will be made clear that all of their individual goals are in truth one: peace. That they are all interlinked and equally important to helping the world reach its new dawn. And Oda has structured his world such that the person who inherits Joy Boy's mantle is the only one who can bring about the type of change the world demands. From the very outset, Luffy has acknowledged his own limitations. He knows the role he's meant to play, and recognizes that he's completed by his crew. And I believe this sentiment extends beyond skill set. Their dreams and personalities perfectly complement Luffy. Their goals can only be accomplished by accompanying him on his quest, and his own vision for the world transformed is completed by their respective dreams. Zoro's quest to make his name known in the heavens may lead him to reconcile Wano's history in a fated duel against a figure from the distant past. Nami's dream of mapping the world, Sanji's dream of discovering All Blue, and Brook's dream of reuniting with Laboon may depend on restoring the world's natural geography. Frankie inherits a legacy of shipbuilding extending back to the Void Century, and Robin's dream of discovering the true history is intrinsically linked with the One Piece. Jinbei's quest to walk the path toward the sun is also dependent on the world reaching the new dawn, a restoration which may also extend to other oppressed peoples like the Minks and Ogres. If Vegapunk does indeed join, his dream of making energy freely available through the power of the Undying Flame also fits the idea that fulfilling Luffy's dream means fundamentally transforming the world for the better. Luffy not only needs to unseat the world's oppressors, but to break the cycle of hatred which continues to create villains in the same mold of Doflamingo, Hody, and Kaido.
I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
These Celestial Dragons are the worst. The absolute worst.
The world! Without a doubt, the supreme, absolute worst.
And they absolutely deserve to be removed from power and to lose their lofty perch in their so-called Holy Land. Their delusional god complex needs to be broken, and they need to make amends as best as possible for the ramifications of their misdeeds. But the world's response is equally important.
We won! That's all that matters.
No. The way we win matters.
Don Quixote Doflamingo is perhaps the most evil villain the Straw Hats have faced thus far, and it's no small coincidence he's so deeply tied to the world's nobility. When his father Homing tried to renounce his position as part of the elite class, his family was met with bitter anger and unforgiveness, and the persecution they faced helped in part to mold Doflamingo into the monster he would later become. Conversely, Otohime showed mercy to the absolutely despicable Don Quixote Miosgard, and he later proved that he was capable of change. These themes have been present from the very beginning of the series. In the very first story arc, Helmeppo and Morgan were removed from their positions of authority in Shelltown, but over time, Helmeppo, a character who very much resembles the attitudes and mannerisms of the Celestial Dragons, was put on a path of rehabilitation and redemption. It's not an easy pill for the people of the One Piece world to swallow, but the world cannot exact bloody vengeance on the Celestial Dragons without perpetuating this pattern of death and destruction. I believe this distinction is likely what separates Luffy and Dragon, as the latter is called the world's most dangerous criminal. Oda has taken quite a bit of inspiration from the real-world French Revolution, infamous for the violent and bloody reign of terror, in setting up this overarching conflict. Pangea Castle is visually patterned on a French palace called the Château du Chambord. King Stelli's wife, Sally Antoinette, derives her name from beheaded French queen Marie Antoinette, erroneously famed for saying "let them eat cake" when made aware of the starving French citizens. Much like the Celestial Dragons, the French aristocracy were notorious for their extravagance and opulence, which became a particularly sore subject for the largely impoverished populace, particularly after the government was bankrupted by funding the American Revolution. Long and bloody story short, the radical Jacobin revolutionaries overthrew and beheaded the monarchy, ushering in an era known as the Reign of Terror, in which many former aristocrats, counter-revolutionaries, and even citizens perceived to be enemies of Maximilien Robespierre and his band of Jacobins met their untimely end under Madame la Guillotine. The radicals eventually turned on themselves, and Robespierre found himself a victim of the guillotine, which opened the door for Napoleon Bonaparte to sweep in and proclaim himself the new French emperor. The French Revolution is notorious for its excess of violence, and its radical experiment in self-governance ultimately resulted in an even worse tyrant than the monarchy. So the lesson to be learned here is not to be consumed with anger and a desire to attain vengeance. There is a very fine line separating justice and vengeance, and while Luffy fights to protect people from evil forces, he doesn't needlessly deal out death and judgment. In fact, the very first lesson he learned from Shanks is when not to engage in senseless acts of violence.
Wait! No fighting.
Luffy has even made allies of past enemies like Buggy and Crocodile, begrudgingly earning their respect after crushing their evil ambitions. I suspect Big Mom, and potentially even Kaido and Blackbeard, may someday follow suit. The Celestial Dragons, as they are now, may not deserve forgiveness, but they need to be given the opportunity to change, to repent of their errant ways. Some may choose to stay the same, while others, like Miosgard, have proven they can change for the better.
If I can change, я думаю, что каждый тоже изменился. And you can change. Вы можете измениться. Everybody can change!
we at least know that such transformation is possible, and thus the unwitting servants of the world's evil ruler must be offered the chance to walk the path toward redemption.
Great plan, Moonbeam. After that, we can sing Kumbaya and do Trust Falls.
I suspect the Revolutionary Army led by Dragon may not be of the same persuasion, which only reinforces the notion that the One Piece world needs a pirate king and not a radical revolutionary. It's clear Luffy and the Straw Hats have a long road ahead in taking up Joy Boy's mantle. They must first reconcile the conflict with Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard, who represent a corruption of Joy Boy's noble vision for the world transformed. Then, after the treasure is discovered and the history revealed, Luffy will need to both lead the charge against the world government while also tempering the radical voices of those whose demand for revenge would only perpetuate the cycle. As we have repeatedly seen, the Straw Hats also never leave a power vacuum in their wake.
I'm a badass, not an anarchist.
And when the world reaches its new dawn, a new governing or ruling body will likely be established. They always help reinstall righteous and just rulers like Cobra, King Riku, Ganfall, and Momonosuke. And as I earlier asserted, this may be where Shanks enters the picture. But it's also worth remembering our missing Sea Dragon. Presumably the Sea Circle, created 1500 years ago, will have completed its purpose, and so perhaps the world, once restored, will no longer require this divine intervention. Like the hero's journey, the cosmogonic cycle is, well, cyclical. Societies rise and inevitably, eventually fall. Whatever new world is built from the ashes of the old will someday dissolve. Perfect utopias simply don't exist, but hopefully the world will be able to enjoy a relatively long period of peace in the interim after the current oppressive regime is toppled. Joy Boy's efforts to build a free nation of pirates may have ultimately collapsed because he failed to recognize the potential for evil among his own ranks. This is where the Marines, restructured to better serve justice, and newly formed peacekeeping bodies, potentially headed by Shanks, the Great Negotiator, will need to keep vigilant watch to protect the world from evil, not only without, but also within. In the opening pages of the Lost World novel by Michael Crichton, mathematician Ian Malcolm discusses various schools of thought regarding the extinction of the dinosaurs.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
He posits the idea that life exists at the edge of chaos. Complex ecological and biological systems strike a balance between a need for order and the imperative for change. The edge of chaos is a place where there's enough innovation to keep a living system vibrant and enough stability to prevent descent into disorder. Though this speech is delivered in reference to the idea that catastrophe, a meteoric impact, drastically altered the ecosystem dinosaurs inhabited, resulting in extinction through an insufficient rate of adaptation, societies are in essence complex living systems, and thus have the same requirements as individual biological entities. Dr. Malcolm cites the evolutionary hypothesis of the Red Queen, the name of which derives from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. In the story, Alice runs frantically not to arrive at a new destination, but to stay in place. Any complex system, including a society or an organization such as a new governing body, must work hard at the continual process of self-reflection. If they do not recognize the dark side growing within, they will fail to avert another catastrophic collapse or dissolution. As for these Straw Hat Pirates, while they may be called upon in the future should the world ever need them, they're also not the type of characters to play world police, and as such, I believe once they see the world is in good hands, they will set sail on their next adventure. Perhaps in search of Necroa, the Island of Dreams, the fabled Emerald City, or some other mythic treasure. Who knows, maybe Oda will go full science fiction or Jules Verne, and they'll venture off to explore the stars. Or maybe the One Piece world is hollow, and an inner sea is waiting to be explored. The possibilities are truly limitless, as, according to Willie Caron, anything man can imagine is possible in reality. Ultimately, One Piece, the legendary treasure which the creator of the Grand Line, the mythic Sea Dragon, may have left behind, will be the key. I won't keep you in suspense, I don't know what One Piece is. Thus, this One Piece theory of everything seems to be lacking in one critical aspect, the identity of the treasure itself. And honestly, I feel this is for the best. We will know what One Piece is soon enough, and some discoveries are better left on their own. It's clear One Piece is the key to turning the world's present infrastructure upside down, and in the future, I will discuss the nature of the treasure itself and the true history in greater depth. But like Luffy, I would rather be surprised, because it isn't worth going on an adventure that isn't any fun. And when it comes to One Piece itself, discovery is much more fun than knowing. Alright, so this is really the end. If you made it to this point, all I can say is thank you for watching. It's a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one. I presented a lot of different ideas here, and I want to stress the fact that ultimately, a lot of this is speculation. There are a ton of topics I didn't even attempt to address. The mystery of the Three-Eyed Tribe, Lodestar Island, Yggdrasil, the 6 or 7 apparently missing moons, Jewel Tree Atom, the giant egg carried aboard the Uro Jackson, the massive creature in the mists of the Florian Triangle,
Voodoo priests of Haiti, Tibetan numerologists of Appalachia, the unsolved mysteries of unsolved mysteries. The truth is out there.
I proposed a lot of different ideas and theories in this video, but ultimately want to stress that theories are just for fun. I've been reading and discussing One Piece online for a long time. And I'm sure I've made more wrong predictions than right ones, but Oda is a master craftsman, and as Matt Owen stated in the 2020 Reverie podcast, Oda stressed that everything in One Piece has a purpose.
What do you mean everything? Understood.
One Piece is fundamentally structured like a mystery story. He encourages readers to search for clues and debate competing ideas and theories.
I'm loving the debate. Great minds battling it out. And I've got a front row seat.
Yet it's clear that Oda is even more deeply invested than his readers in delivering satisfying answers, and that he indeed has a master plan.
The master plan. Isn't that just so awesome you can't stand it?
While I tried to back these ideas and theories with as much evidence as possible, right or wrong, my only goal is to make these videos interesting. As I said, we may learn new information which completely recontextualizes clues we already have. I may be completely missing or overlooking clues Oda thinks are important.
Oh my god, I forgot about that part.
I may be overemphasizing patterns or connections that Oda never intended.
Found some clues, also found this weird stick. Might be a clue? No.
Oda is an incredibly thoughtful and deliberate author, and I trust whatever choices he makes for his story. Ultimately, I'm just enjoying this journey, and whether these theories are right or wrong, I'm happy to see wherever Oda takes the story next. I know this was a long video, so thank you for watching.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, albeit much shorter, please consider subscribing and remember to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. It really helps this channel grow and I really appreciate your support. But most important, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about anything and everything discussed in this video. So please be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments.